My name's Peggy Welsh. I'm with Energetics. We are a support contractor to the Department of Energy, and it is my distinct honor today to be the meeting facilitator, which means that I have the time clock. We have a very tight schedule, as you saw in your agenda that you picked up at the check-in desk. And so I want to read just a couple of housekeeping notes. There will be very little time for questions, but this panel, if there is time, will take questions from the floor. And if you wish to speak during the open mic session, you need to sign in at the check-in desk and let folks there know. So please do that if you wish to speak. But let me just read what we're trying to accomplish today. The purpose of today's meeting is to ask for your individual input or your organization's input regarding energy infrastructure, resiliency, and vulnerabilities, and to provide a forum to exchange information amongst panelists. To that end, it would be most helpful to you, for us, if you would provide these recommendations and information based on your personal experience, your individual advice, information, or facts regarding the topics we're discussing today. The object of this session is not to obtain any position, group position, or consensus. Rather, the Department of Energy is seeking as many recommendations as possible from all individuals at this meeting. This is pursuant to the requirements of the Federal Advisory Committee Act. So with that, let me introduce Ms. Melanie Kenderdine. She is the Director of the Department of Energy's Office of Energy Policy and Systems Analysis and a counselor to Secretary Moniz.
Thank you, Peggy, and thank you for everyone here today and those of you in cyberspace for your interest in this process. The office that I direct, the Energy Policy and Systems Analysis Office, is supporting the Quadrennial Energy Review. We're doing the analytical work and helping to manage the interagency process. As most of you know, the Quadrennial Energy Review is a process led by the White House, and Dr. Holdren and Secretary Moniz will talk a little bit more about that today. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Karen Wayland. She's a deputy director in our office. She's been putting these meetings together. She and her team have done a terrific job, and she has about 14 more to do across the country. They are just an outstanding team. I'm going to introduce the three panelists for the first panel. I'm going to do them in the order that they will speak. I'll introduce them all at once. The first is Dr. John Holdren. He is an assistant to the President for Science and Technology, director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, the co-chair of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, and the co-chair of the White House Task Force for the Quadrennial Energy Review. That task force with Dan Utek, who's with the Domestic Policy Council at the White House, and I think Dan is at a wedding today and could not be here. He would be here otherwise. Among other things, Dr. Holdren was also on the faculty of Harvard and UC Berkeley prior to joining the Obama administration. Next, you're going to hear from the United States Secretary of Energy, Dr. Ernest Moniz. Prior to becoming Energy Secretary in May of last year, Professor Moniz was the director of the MIT Energy Initiative and served on the faculty of MIT for 40 years. I had the pleasure of working with the Secretary both at the MIT Energy Initiative and when he served as a DOE Undersecretary in the Clinton administration. Professor Moniz, or now Secretary Moniz, was the last single Undersecretary at the Department of Energy. We now have three, and I can attest to the fact that he does the work of three people and is, I think, an outstanding secretary. He's my fourth. Finally, we'll hear from Congressman Henry Waxman. Mr. Waxman is the ranking member of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce and the longtime representative of California's 33rd Congressional District. Representative Waxman has been a leader in the Congress on health care and environmental issues. He is a primary author of the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990 and sponsored the Safe Drinking Water Act amendments in 1986 and 1996. Mr. Waxman may not remember me, but I was a young Hill staffer. I was chief of staff to then Congressman Bill Richardson, and had the opportunity to work with him, Karen Nelson, Phil Scalero, and many others on his staff many, many years ago. As you all know, Mr. Waxman recently announced his retirement, and I would like to say that the nation owes him a debt of gratitude for his service. I think it's worth giving Mr. Waxman a hand. And in closing, let me say something about Drs. Holdren and Moniz. Secretary Moniz was a member of the PCAST, and that was led by Dr. Holdren at the time in November of 2010, when PCAST issued a report recommending that the government conduct a quadrennial energy review to provide the nation with a roadmap for energy policy based on data and rigorous analysis. As Secretary Moniz likes to say about the QER, he and Dr. Holdren were there to toss the QER baseball at the beginning of the inning and are now, in their current capacities, on the other side of the pitch to catch the ball. It is a pleasure to welcome these three outstanding public servants, and let me turn this over to Dr. Holdren. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Melanie, and thanks to all of you for being here this morning. It is certainly a pleasure to be here with my friend Secretary Moniz to open the first public stakeholder meeting for the Quadrennial Energy Review. And I'm also very pleased indeed that Ranking Member Waxman could be with us at this important meeting. He is indeed a giant among legislators, and his contributions to the domain of environment that is so dear to my heart have been immense. The fundamental purpose of today's session, of course, is to hear from you, to hear from experts and the public outside of the executive branch about the very important challenges we face around energy infrastructure. So I'm going to make my remarks very brief, not to cut too deeply into the opportunity to hear from you. I do want to say that the idea to have regular reviews of national energy policy is even older than the Department of Energy. As far back as 1973, the former Atomic Energy Commission was charged by then President Richard Nixon with preparing a report on, quote, our nation's energy future. When Congress established the Department of Energy, its Organic Act called for a biennial publication of a national energy policy plan. Those, however, were only produced sporadically over the years. As Melanie has already noted, at the outset of the current administration, President Obama asked his Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, his PCAST, to review our energy technology innovation system. The President wanted PCAST to recommend ways to accelerate a large-scale transformation of energy production, delivery, and use to meet the challenges of the 21st century, including, of course, the challenge of climate change. In response, PCAST formed a broad-based working group. It was led by the Vice President of the National Academy of Engineering, Maxine Savitz, and an obscure professor from MIT named Ernest Moniz. The panel identified as its most important recommendation a proposal that the administration should establish a new process to forge a more coordinated and robust federal energy policy through a quadrennial energy review, which we now call the QER. It envisioned that the QER process would produce a multi-year roadmap that would produce four key results. One, it would lay out an integrated view of short, intermediate, and long-term energy objectives. It would put forward possible executive actions that could be coordinated across multiple agencies to help address those objectives. It would identify resource requirements for the development and implementation of the transformation of the energy system, particularly with respect to the new technologies that will be required. And it would outline legislative proposals to go to the Congress as needed and appropriate. PCAST also recommended that the Secretary of Energy provide an executive secretariat for the QER, which of course it has done. And you just heard from the leader of that executive secretariat. And while the QER was intended to be a product of the administration and ultimately the government through the engagement of the Congress, PCAST also recognized that substantial input from the energy industry, from academia, from NGOs, and the public at large would be essential to its success. The President embraced the PCAST recommendations, started implementing them by having the Department of Energy carry out a quadrennial technology review, focused more narrowly just on the characteristics of the technologies that were available and would be becoming available. That was completed in November of 2011. And last summer, as part of his climate action plan, the President called for the next step, a full-fledged QER, with the first year's installment focused on energy infrastructure. And I want to emphasize that quadrennial doesn't mean that nothing happens until 4 years from now. There's a moving spotlight, and again, as you all know, this first year's focus is on the challenges around infrastructure. As envisioned, we're beginning the process of collecting substantial input on our energy infrastructure challenges and vulnerabilities from a wide range of experts, including the public at large, and that's what this meeting is about. As the Science and Technology Advisor to the President and one of the co-chairs of the QER effort, I'm looking forward to listening to as much of today's session as I can before I have to return around midday to prepare for other meetings focused on energy and climate change at the White House. But my staff will be staying behind in the audience to ensure that we hear directly from the panels and the public, and of course there'll be a record of this meeting compiled by the Secretariat. At this point, I want to turn the podium over to Secretary Moniz. Before I do, I want to thank the Secretary and Melanie and all the staff of the Executive Secretariat at the DOE for the extraordinary work that they have already been doing. I'm very pleased indeed at the effort they put into making this meeting possible, including the hard work of Melanie Kinderdine and the Director of Outreach for the QER, Dr. Karen Wayland. With that, Ernie, podium is yours.
Well, thank you, John, and thanks to Melanie. And I'd like to add my gratitude and congratulations to Henry Waxman, our very good friend, and as already been said, enormous contributor to energy and environment issues over decades. Since I was labeled as being a professor for 40 years, I think we'll share these age remarks in terms of decades of service. I know I am very confident that Congressman Waxman will continue to make enormous contributions to our energy and environmental future, just from a different perspective, one that will free him from his legendary reticence. But Henry, again, thank you so much for what you've done. John gave the history of how we got here and what our major objectives are. I'll just emphasize a few points in these remarks. One has already been stated, but I want to reinforce. So the Department of Energy was charged by the President in his presidential memorandum to provide the Executive Secretariat. That will entail also building, as we have done with EPSA, the analytical capacity, expanding that dramatically. But having said that, I want to emphasize this has to be a multi-agency effort to succeed. That'll be under the co-chairmanship, as already stated, of John Holdren, Dan Utek. And as I come to discuss a set of regional meetings that were already mentioned, we are envisioning 14 or 15 regional meetings, that those will also engage other agencies. Just want to make that clear. That's not just a DOE activity. The second point is that we have a significantly altered energy landscape in the United States, as we all know, and this landscape has led to tremendous opportunity for our economy, for our energy security, and very importantly, of course, for addressing our environmental challenges, most especially climate change mitigation and adaptation over the next years. But by the same token, this also is the origin of a set of challenges in terms of how the system will evolve. Clearly, we all understand the natural gas change, also oil production from unconventional sources. But in addition, we are looking at expansion of renewables. We're looking at electric vehicle penetration, many other parts of what we see as a transformation of our clean energy system. So that provides a backdrop, and these changes, we have seen the challenges of infrastructure, of course, just in the last months and certainly years, whether it is the natural gas constraints in New England, or the propane constraints we've seen recently, the issue of how do we catch up with infrastructure to avoid methane emissions or to move some of the tight oil. Of course, in the climate context, and we've seen extreme weather events that have had major implications for our energy infrastructure, whether it's Sandy, where we also saw the interdependencies of fuels and electricity, or whether it's the California crisis caused by wildfires. We see drought challenging our power plants operation. So we are seeing an enormous set of challenges, and of course in this QER we will be wanting to take an integrated look at all of these challenges and see what it is that can guide investment in our future infrastructure, indicate what we in the federal government can do in terms of guiding those mainly private sector investments in a direction that is important for tomorrow, but also important for the decades ahead, characteristic of the lifetime of these investments, and recognizing that even as we look at what the federal government can do, that's going to entail a tremendous collaboration with the states, which is again where a lot of the action will be occurring. So that, of course, underpins why we think stakeholder outreach is such a critical part of this process that involves the Congress, involves the states, involves the public, and this is the first, as we've already said now twice, probably 14 or 15 meetings that we will be holding across the country. 5 of those meetings have been announced specifically, looking at infrastructure constraints near the Bakken Formation and in New England, looking at transportation constraints in Chicago, electricity transmission, supply, and distribution issues in Portland, petroleum product transport and distribution issues in New Orleans, and another whole set of meetings, including focus areas, to be announced in the near future. So that really summarizes what I wanted to emphasize, including the importance of these meetings. And of course, we are open to other forms of input from all the stakeholders, but these meetings will provide, we hope, important, focused opportunities for us to address certain issues. So with that, thank you, and we look forward to your input. And with that, I guess I turn it over to our good friend, Congressman Waxman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, Dr. Holdren. I appreciate you inviting me today to give my perspective on the Quadrennial Energy Review, and I won't be reticent, even though I'm still a member of Congress. I will continue to speak out, and I agree with you that this is the right time to engage policymakers and the public in an examination of our energy infrastructure. The QER is an opportunity to look at where our energy infrastructure is today and where it needs to be tomorrow. There's no question that this is a timely endeavor. A significant energy transition is already underway in our country. State and federal renewable energy policies are paying off. We've doubled our capacity to generate renewable electricity from wind and solar in just 5 years. This has cut pollution and invigorated clean energy manufacturing. The cost of renewable energy, as a result, is rapidly declining. Cheap natural gas is transforming our electricity sector. This market reality is driving a shift away from the use of coal to generate electricity. New coal plants are simply not cost-effective to build today. They're not suffering from a war on coal. They're suffering from the market system that drives our economy. These changes are positive developments, but we need to accelerate the transition to a clean energy economy and anticipate our future needs now. For decades to come, our energy infrastructure decisions are going to have to revolve around the question of how we respond to climate change. Climate change is the biggest energy challenge we face as a country. We can't examine America's energy future without also examining how we respond to climate change. Last week, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its multi-year report on the state of climate science. The world's leading scientists examined the peer-reviewed science and confirmed that climate change is already happening on all continents and across the oceans, and we will get much worse if we do not act. The impacts of runaway climate change will be severe: reduced crop yields, more heat waves and disease, decreased water availability, more extreme weather events, and the mass extinction of many of the world's species. Our only real choice is whether to respond now while the costs are relatively low and the economic opportunities high, or wait until the costs soar and the opportunities diminish. That means we need to scrutinize energy policy decisions that we make today for their impact on climate change in the future. Every decision to build a new fossil fuel infrastructure poses climate risks. We need to understand and weigh those risks. Otherwise, we risk locking in infrastructure that will produce carbon pollution for decades to come, or creating stranded investments that must be shut down before they've served their useful life. So this is exactly the right time for a quadrennial energy review. The QER is an opportunity to offer a vision of what our energy infrastructure will need to look like to address climate change and the transition to clean energy economy. It is, I'm pleased to say, a key part of the President's Climate Action Plan. President Obama has committed to reducing our carbon pollution 17% by 2020, and then to bend the post-2020 global emission trajectory even further. The QER can provide a blueprint for achieving those carbon pollution reductions in the coming years and decades. It can translate carbon reduction goals into specific actions. The energy choices we make today will determine whether we address the threat of climate change or leave our children and grandchildren with a climate catastrophe. The Quadrennial Energy Review can help us make the right choices. So I am pleased to be here to give you that perspective, which I'm sure most of you already share. And as I understand the program, Melanie, we will now entertain questions.
I think we have about 5 minutes if people want to ask questions of the panelists.
Well, thank you all very much.
Happy to take those. Thank you.
So if people would like to come up to the microphones, we have two on either sides on the floor. If you'll introduce yourself. We have a very few minutes, and our honored guests have agreed to take some questions. Don't be shy.
We answer all the questions.
Okay.
Should we call on people?
Darius.
Please introduce yourself.
Darius Dixon with Politico. Just curious from the administration folks if there's a concern that even the focus on P&D is too broad. Is there any effort to kind of narrow it down?
Well, certainly, it's a big challenge, and the focus is indeed not just transmission and distribution, but transport of liquid and gaseous fossil fuels as well as electricity. So, yes, it's ambitious, but we think the nature of the challenge requires looking at it in an integrated way. We have a very capable team, and we're going to be gathering a lot of insights from the wider community. So we expect, notwithstanding the size of the challenge, we're going to get it done.
I would just add that we are very aware of the scope of the challenge, but I have to say that the group has been working at it, EPSA in particular, with contributions also coming from other agencies in terms of kind of preparing background papers, et cetera. These will be heavily influenced, of course, by what we get back. It's a challenge. We're not denying that, but as Dr. Holdren said, I just reinforce it's ambitious, but we believe the payoff is big, and we're going to do all that we can to really make this a coherent set of observations, findings, and recommendations for action in major parts of our infrastructure challenges, electricity, but also things like fuels, resilience, where I should have said perhaps there will have to be a very, very strong regional focus to the analyses. Some of the examples I gave, of course, very different challenges, very different bottlenecks, very different opportunities in different parts of our country.
We have time for one more question.
Since Darius asked, I'm not as tall as you. Esther Whelan with SML Energy. Since Darius broke the seal on press asking questions, I thought I would. I was wondering if this connects in any way to the congestion studies on transmission congestion that are apparently still ongoing. They were supposed to be done for 2012, and if you expect to face any of the same challenges that I've heard you faced in the congestion study and getting data that can actually be used that's public, that can lend itself to a study that can actually be put out.
Well, we certainly will be looking at all previous works and studies, analyses, and we will be looking at transmission congestion. Just so you know, we are in the process of putting together a library that will be on the QER website, which Karen can give you the address. I can never remember it, and we will be very focused on transmission and as the Secretary said, fuel resiliency issues as well.
I would just add to it that, as was implied, I mean, frankly, the more we can build on existing strong analyses, the better we are, partly to address the first question that was asked. And those congestion studies address what are a subset of the issues involved in the power system, because there are multiple issues. Congestion is one, but we have to look coherently at cyber issues, physical threats, extreme weather, interdependencies of different infrastructures. So I think what we would hope to do is to be able to do that knitting together of different factors into a balanced approach. And the congestion studies, again, are one important part of a bigger picture.
If I could just say, too, we're also looking at ways, at infrastructure avoidance. The efficiency will be one of the things we'll be looking at, and ways that we can avoid congestion and avoid building new infrastructure with other options. So.
Melanie, you said 5 minutes, so I'm going to thank you all. Please join me in a round of applause for our distinguished guests. We're going to now turn to our first panel, and I'd like to invite those panelists to join me up here on stage. While we're getting set up, Melanie mentioned that there is a QER website. That website, if you'd like to jot this down, is www.energy.gov/QER. Additionally, the Department of Energy is very interested in getting your comments in writing, and there is an address for that. That is QERcomments@hq.doe.gov. So if you have not been invited as a panelist, or you do not wish to make comments at these public meetings, please feel free to submit your comments in writing to that address. Let me now turn to our first panel of very distinguished speakers. The panel topic is resiliency and vulnerabilities in energy transmission, storage, and distribution. And as you know, that is the primary focus of this year's Year 1 Quadrennial Energy Review report. With us on stage, we have Peggy Montana with Shell, Dwayne Hiley with Arkansas Electric Cooperative, Inc., John Rigby, Chairman of the Board and President and CEO of PEPCO, Andy Black, President and CEO of Association of Oil Pipelines, and Jerry Cawley, President and CEO of the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. Peggy, I'll let you start off, and then just go down the line.
All right, thank you, Peggy. Good morning. I am Peggy Montana, Executive Vice President for Pipelines and Special Projects for Shell Downstream. My previous role was Executive Vice President for Supply and Distribution for Shell, and overall I have 37 years of industry experience at both the national and the global level. I'm testifying today on behalf of the American Petroleum Institute, a trade association whose 590-plus members represent all aspects of the oil and natural gas industry, and who own and operate much of the U.S. supply and distribution system for oil, natural gas, and petroleum products, from refineries to distribution terminals. I'm here today to discuss the resilience of the domestic oil and natural gas industry's infrastructure. Today, thanks to the innovation and entrepreneurial spirit of the men and women in America's oil and natural gas industry, this nation is on pace to take the lead role on the world's energy stage. The following facts bear this out. In 2013, the U.S. became the world's top producer of petroleum and natural gas, surpassing Russia and Saudi Arabia. This year, that production is expected to set new records in oil production, rising over 30% to 8.45 million barrels per day. U.S. refining capacity has increased nearly 230,000 barrels of oil per day from 2008 to 2013, and 70 U.S. refineries today are operating at more than 90% of capacity. An average of $4 billion in annual gas processing investments will be made from the period of 2014 to 2019. This oil and gas production renaissance, when coupled with our world-class refining industry, provides the U.S. with a level of energy security that we've not seen in decades. The oil and natural gas industry is already making significant private investments to further diversify our infrastructure in light of this new energy reality. For example, cumulative investment in U.S. crude oil pipelines of $37.8 billion between 2014 and 2025, with the majority being invested during the first 6 years of the forecast period. Total investment in NGL pipelines over the forecast period is projected at $23.9 billion from 2014 to 2025. And finally, investment in crude dedicated rail cars and both crude loading and unloading facilities was $3.8 billion in 2013. These investments should be strongly encouraged because they will strengthen both our energy security and our economic development. According to a recent study by IH Global, an average annual energy infrastructure investment of up to $95 billion would contribute as much as $120 billion to U.S. GDP, support as many as 1.15 million jobs, and provide an additional $24 billion in government revenues on average annually between 2014 and 2025. As DOE undertakes this quadrennial energy review, the task force should be cognizant of the following. First and foremost, the goals of the QER should be clearly identified and adhered to. Having been involved in efforts such as these in the not-too-distant past, I can say with certainty that scope creep will be a constant threat. This study should draw on the ongoing work by the National Petroleum Council, NPC, that's building on the recent API report, Oil and Natural Gas Industry Preparedness. I am playing a lead role for the latest NPC study on emergency preparedness for natural disasters that impact the oil and natural gas industry, currently scheduled to be completed this coming August. We have been very deliberate on what is included and what is not included. This study will provide advice on how the oil and gas industry and government at all levels can better prepare and respond to defined emergencies. Emergencies considered in this study will include significant disruptions to oil and gas supply chains, which might occur from severe hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, and other natural disasters, but not from sabotage, cyber, or other terrorism-related events. This study will focus on aggregating existing information to educate policymakers, the industry, and the general public on the petroleum industry infrastructure, market dynamics, interdependencies, the challenges posed when adversely impacted by disaster events, and the framework to restore normal operations and expeditiously supply consumers with fuel, including refined products and natural gas. Building on this foundation, the NPC will provide advice on strategies and actions to enhance communications between the petroleum industry and government levels, as well as interdependent industries, such as electricity and transportation, to enable informed decisions in a dynamic environment and to improve emergency preparedness and supply chain resiliency. The QER should recognize the hardening and resilience actions that the oil and natural gas industry has undertaken in light of lessons learned from previous events that were highlighted in the DOE's August 2010 report, Hardening and Resiliency, U.S. Energy Industry Response to Recent Hurricane Seasons. These actions have proven effective, as witnessed by the industry's ability to respond and restore service quickly following major incidents, such as Gulf Coast hurricanes Ike and Gustav and Tropical Storm Sandy. Some of those actions include elevating critical components, such as substations and control rooms, improving tank integrity, conducting hurricane preparedness planning and training, and pre-positioning and pre-wiring portable generators. The QER should identify and discuss policies at both federal and state levels that encourage further oil and gas development. This will in turn enable this nation to harness the power of the free market and to further improve our energy security. Some issues to consider include approval of the Keystone Pipeline, streamlining permit approvals for other private infrastructure investments, allowing the export of natural gas and crude oil. Crude oil exports could boost domestic oil production by up to 500,000 barrels per day by 2020, according to a recent study by ICF International. Similarly, a 2013 ICF study found that 16 billion cubic feet per day of LNG exports in 2035 would boost U.S. dry gas production by over 12 billion cubic feet per day and NGL production by 555,000 barrels per day. Ultimately, the QER will best utilized when it identifies not only those issues that help to ensure that the U.S. cements its status as an energy leader, but also any mechanisms that can be used to help get our country past any obstacles for development. In closing, let me assure everyone here that we take our role seriously as we recognize the products that we produce fuel the productivity of our nation. We are keenly aware that any disruption in service is not good for the nation and not good for our industry. There's also the recognition that safety has to be a key component of everything we do. We should most certainly provide energy in an efficient manner but we should also strive to do this without incident. I look forward to engaging further on this issue, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this effort.
Before we go on to our next speaker, let me say that we'll hold our applause until all of our speakers have given their presentations, and their statements will be uploaded to the QER website after this meeting. And I just want to remind everybody to keep their comments to 5 minutes. We have a timer there, so if you'll just watch that. And we'd love to hear from Mr. Hiley next.
There it is. Good morning. My name's Dwayne Hiley, and I'm the President, CEO, and I like to call myself the Chief Affordability Officer for the Arkansas Electric Cooperative Corporation, which is a nonprofit, member-owned power supply cooperative serving 2/3 of the land mass in Arkansas and over 1 million ultimate consumers. I'm here today to represent the perspective of cooperatives and other consumer-owned utilities on the critically important topics of grid resiliency and vulnerabilities. I want to talk a little bit about the strength of the existing grid, just to make sure that we don't unnecessarily devalue what we already have. Now, the primary mission of Arkansas Cooperatives is to provide reliable power affordably and responsibly. As a nonprofit power supply and services cooperative, we aren't in business to make a profit. We exist solely to improve the lives of our member owners and the communities in which they live. So I wanted to take a moment to tell you where I've been this past week. I just returned from Quilco, Huehuetenango, Guatemala, where linemen from Arkansas Electric Cooperatives have been working for the past 2 weeks to assist local villagers in putting up poles, stringing lines to bring electricity to remote villages in the mountains of Guatemala that have never had it before. These linemen volunteered their time to assist those local villagers. These people were so grateful when the lines were energized for the first time. Tears were streaming down their face. It was an incredible experience for myself and all of us, and it gives me a particular appreciation for the high quality and reliable electric service we often take for granted. It seems to be in vogue these days to refer to the U.S. electric grid as outdated, antiquated, obsolete, or even third world. Well, I have been to that third world, and I can tell you there's nothing third world or antiquated about the grid we enjoy here in the United States. We deploy the latest technology and continually update our facilities to ensure that our members have the highest and most reliable quality of service. In fact, our first mission is to be reliable. If you can't make the power reliable, it doesn't matter what it costs. Anyone who's lived through a long power outage knows the value of electricity is far greater than its price. But in rural America, where I come from, affordability is particularly important. We serve some of the poorest families in the country. It's our responsibility to see that that energy is delivered to them at the lowest possible cost. Electric cooperatives face an additional challenge in that we have higher investment per consumer than other utilities. On average, cooperatives serve only 7 consumers per mile of line investment. Even with this additional burden, we manage to deliver energy at rates that are comparable to those of other for-profit utilities by focusing on efficiency and cost instead of profit. Now, besides my role as CEO for the cooperative, I also serve as Vice Chairman of the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council, or ESCC, which is a partnership between government and industry to improve security, reliability, and resiliency of the power supply system. We meet regularly with representatives from the DOE, Department of Homeland Security, and the White House, and other government agencies to improve information sharing and to develop action plans. I believe the work of this council serves as a model for other critical infrastructure areas in the United States. Our partnership has been great. For example, the ESC has worked with the government to obtain security clearances for utility CEOs, allowing them to be briefed on the potential threats to the grid. This dialogue has allowed the utility leaders to better direct the resources to anticipate those threats. Also, utilities have partnered with the government to deploy advanced technology to protect power system networks from cyber threats. To my knowledge, the electric sector and the nuclear side of our industry is the only critical infrastructure area which has mandatory enforceable standards for cybersecurity. These standards are vetted by subject matter experts through NERC's standards development process and approved by the NERC Board of Trustees and FERC before becoming mandatory. Now, that process may be slow, and it's been criticized as being slow, But the only way to assure reliability is not compromised is to take our time and make sure we do the process right. Utilities are committed to working with NERC to complete similar mandatory standard development on the physical security as recently ordered by FERC. Now, additional regulations may enhance the security of our grid, but redundancy is our first line of defense against all threats, natural or intentional. Our industry has direct experience with threats such as occurred in California at the Metcalf substation, or in 3 instances last year in Little Rock, Arkansas. Initially, we did not know the source of those sabotage incidents. A transmission tower was pulled down, substation control building was burned, and transmission lines were cut. Utilities worked directly with the FBI and other government agencies as these events occurred. The deliberate acts of sabotage failed to cause the desired interruption of service, primarily because of the redundancy that was designed into the grid from the beginning. This redundancy is a critical aspect of grid resiliency. When it comes to the electric sector reliability, my primary concern as someone responsible for delivering reliable power is the impact that will come from proposed carbon dioxide emission regulations. Because of those regulations, we can no longer affordably build new coal plants. In the Grid X2 grid security exercise hosted by NERC last fall, we simulated the outage of a number of facilities which left millions in simulated state of without power. It should be noted that in that proposed simulation, there was more capacity removed from the grid. There will be more capacity removed by the carbon regulations than what was removed in that exercise. And while I'm not saying that the grid will immediately fail if we take coal out of the grid, there will be reliability impacts. That's inevitable. Steel in the ground is what gives you grid reliability. There's a lot of talk about the aging grid, and I appreciate the heightened concern about resiliency, but I do want to push back on the notion that our grid is not first world. We're ready to handle the challenges of the 21st century energy industry. We continue to be open to new technologies when they can be shown to be cost-effective and benefit our consumers. Since we're member-owned and governed, we're very sensitive to people with dreamy investments that don't provide clear benefits. A lot of people would like to have a government mandate to force us to put in something that might provide a small measure of benefit. But it's our job to balance cost and reliability to keep the power reliable and affordable. Reflecting on my experience in Guatemala this past week, I recognize what an incredible benefit access to reliable, affordable energy is to society. Human health, national security, and economic output all benefit. We should recognize how far we've come. I continue to remain optimistic about the future. I've read studies that say it's not possible to keep both a positive and a negative thought in your mind at the same time. We have a choice. I choose to be optimistic. I want to applaud the DOE for hosting this panel on energy policy and look forward to working together to solve our issues. Thank you.
Mr. Rigby, and I apologize for calling you John. It's Joe, and delighted to have you with us.
I have an uncle named John Rigby. He's 88 years old. He would be shocked to know that he should have been here this morning. I want to thank you. I want to thank the Secretary, Dr. Holdren, and the distinguished members of the Quadrennial Energy Review Task Force for the opportunity to address this very important forum that was created by President Obama. My name is Joe Rigby. I'm the Chairman, President, and CEO of Pepco Holdings, or PHI. We're an electric utility delivering power to about 2 million customers in the Mid-Atlantic region. I'm also a member of the Board of Directors of the Edison Electric Institute, which represents our nation's investor-owned utilities. The electric grid generates, transmits, and distributes electric power to millions of Americans, and the utility sector has the engineering and the operational expertise that keeps the grid running reliably in the face of all hazards. Today, though the grid continues to incorporate new technologies and ever-improving practices, the advanced age of many grid components is contributing to vulnerability in the face of new threats. This vulnerability, coupled with our increased dependence on electricity, makes grid resiliency investment an imperative. Severe weather remains the leading cause of power outages, and these severe storms and other events seem to be coming with increasing frequency and intensity. In just the past few years in our service territory, we've experienced Snowmageddon, an earthquake, Hurricane Irene, the derecho followed by a heat wave, Superstorm Sandy, and a polar vortex. This trend is compelling utilities and regulatory commissions to look for grid strengthening strategies that may have significant cost impacts. And the most immediately impactful and cost-effective of these measures include hardening transmission and distribution substation and lines, raising or moving vulnerable infrastructure or building additional infrastructure to increase redundancy, selective undergrounding, or deploying new technologies that enhance reliability and resilience by providing advanced data management and power system control. These new control and information technologies are also making possible microgrids that may allow independent operation during times of system emergency. Though some believe microgrids are the best path for security and consumer independence, moving towards decentralization will increase cost and may cause unintended cost shifts. So we believe policymakers should consider how the grid will be safely, fairly, and efficiently operated, who will be responsible for reliability and safety, how reliability and safety standards will be enforced, how cost of the grid and access to backup power will be allocated, and how to minimize unreasonable cost shifting among customers. In the cyber realm, we know our adversaries are pursuing capabilities to attack, manipulate, or disable grid assets. Similarly, the threat of a violent or deliberate attack when utility infrastructure is very real. In the face of these evolving threats, it is imperative that government and industry leverage each other's expertise. The industry is also active in initiatives like the Voluntary Cyber Security Framework developed in response to the President's executive order, the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, and the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council. Individual utilities have also benefited by applying federally developed cyber threat detection technologies to their operations. In the physical security arena, utilities are actively expanding their view of the realm of possible threats to include attacks such as gunfire from remote location and intrusion via explosive device. In addition, FERC has issued an order requesting that NERC develop standards to address physical security risk and vulnerabilities. The utility sector supports this initiative in that it recognizes that each utility, based on its location, geography, redundancy, system design, and need to harmonize with local communities, could have different challenges when addressing physical threats. Though much has been achieved in the security realm, open issues do remain. For instance, in the absence of federal legislation, much is left undefined with regard to data privacy and the liability associated with bidirectional information sharing. Similarly, without explicit authorizations, forums to coordinate event response may have unresolved jurisdictional issues. In addition, as threats become more sophisticated and our investments grow significantly, some systemized form of prompt cost recovery may be needed. In summary, the grid has tremendous value as an enabler of economic growth, of our advanced standard of living, and of an all-of-the-above energy strategy. But the grid is vulnerable to emerging climatic, physical, and cyber threats. These threats are best addressed through public-private partnerships. Existing partnerships should be expanded to allow for better information flow, role clarity, and for expanded coordination. New partnerships can be developed to establish new financing mechanisms for resiliency investment, and government policies should be shaped to attract capital, provide regulatory certainty, and mitigate risks so that risk operators can continue to meet the very real need for a dynamic and resilient modern grid. I want to thank you again for allowing me to provide input, and I'll be happy to respond to questions later.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and congratulations to DOE on an impressive first event. I see some very able people and friends in this room. We're on Capitol Hill. I remember the old line that if you're looking for consensus, you get the right people in the room and lock the door. Soon enough, you might get it. If we were in pursuit of that today, I think we've got a great grouping of people here. So thank you, and congratulations again. I'm Andy Black, President and CEO of the Association of Oil Pipelines. Liquid pipelines we represent transport the crude oil, refined petroleum products, and natural gas liquids that American consumers and workers use every day. Americans benefit from liquid pipelines to heat their homes, fuel their vehicles, dry their clothes, harvest and dry crops, manufacture consumer goods, and more. Nearly every gallon of gasoline American consumers put into their vehicles travels at some point through a pipeline. In 2012, liquid pipeline operators delivered more than 14.1 billion barrels of crude oil and petroleum products across more than 185,000 miles of pipelines in the U.S. Pipeline operators are spending billions of dollars to construct new pipeline infrastructure connecting America to its changing and growing energy supplies. We're building new lines, expanding the delivery capacity of existing lines, and reversing flow of other lines to match our infrastructure to America's energy needs. More than 10,000 miles of new liquid pipelines have been added into service in the last 4 years. A recent review predicts $9.4 billion in pipeline infrastructure spending just this year, over 3,300 project miles. Government policies play an important role in assuring availability of needed pipeline capacity to meet the needs of the American people. FERC policies today appropriately incent liquid pipeline operators to construct infrastructure needed to respond quickly to America's changing needs by shippers. It's also essential that states make timely decisions on siting requests for pipelines, federal agencies process permits for certain pipeline construction activities, and of course, forgive me, that the U.S. Department of State efficiently grants presidential permits for pipeline facilities crossing national borders. Pipelines are the safest mode of transporting large volumes of energy liquids. In 2012, greater than 99.9998% of the liquids transported by pipelines reached their destination safely. When reviewing Keystone XL, the State Department found that alternative modes of transportation would result in 2.4 to 9 times more crude oil released in the environment each year. Liquid pipeline operators are also investing heavily to maintain and continue improving the safety of liquid pipelines. They spent over $1.6 billion in 2012 evaluating, inspecting, and performing maintenance on their pipeline systems. An extensive set of pipeline safety laws and federal regulations administered by PHMSA directs the safe design, construction, and operation of pipelines. On a continuous cycle, pipeline operators review their pipeline systems, evaluate the risks the systems face and the condition of their pipelines, schedule and undertake inspections to identify potential problems, and perform maintenance with the goal of fixing any potential problems long before they become an actual safety issue. Pipeline operators are also engaging in extensive efforts to improve industry performance and minimize their safety vulnerabilities. Industry-wide safety groups continue to develop new standards and recommended practices developed through the American Petroleum Institute, and in many cases adopted by PHMSA through regulation. Earlier this year, the liquid pipeline industry launched the Pipeline Safety Excellence Initiative to take these safety experts to the next level, focusing on key safety issues such as inspection technology, crack management, leak program management, emergency response, and more. Liquid pipelines use pump stations, often powered by electricity, to push liquids through a pipeline. After Hurricane Katrina knocked out power supplies needed for pipeline operations and caused concerns about fuels in the Carolinas and Mid-Atlantic, the pipelines themselves remained intact and ready to make deliveries as power was regained. After Sandy produced local flooding and power outages causing reduced supplies of gasoline and diesel fuel and other products in New Jersey, pipeline operators worked with government and local stakeholders to restore service. These rare crises demonstrate the importance to Americans of maintaining a robust and reliable pipeline network and the resilience of the liquid pipeline sector. Pipeline operators prepare for disasters and emergencies through training and drills, regular communication with first responders, and of course, coordination with government. Pipeline operators also maintain protection against potential cybersecurity attacks. API Standard 1164 on pipeline SCADA security provides industry-wide direction to protect pipeline supervisory control and data acquisition systems that control pipeline flows and pressures, open and close valves, and otherwise operate the pipeline. Liquid pipelines continue to invest in safety, security, and resilience so that they can continue to deliver the fuels American workers and consumers depend upon. Thank you.
Good morning, Jerry Cawley with NERC. I also appreciate the opportunity to be here today to share some thoughts on resilience and what we can do going forward. So the question is, what is resilience? Some equate that to an aging infrastructure, and I guess I subscribe to the same concept as Dwayne. Aging is not an issue. We have the most modern, reliable grid in the world, and I don't think that's really part of the issue. So what is the issue? The issue for me in resilience is how do you manage extreme types of risks? And I was pleased to see in the opening speaker's remarks that the Quadrennial panel is looking to look at fact-based risks. So we have some of those. NERC does an annual report on assessing the performance of the power grid, and we have data from the 2008 through 2012 period. We do have another report coming out in May for 2013. but of the 9 severe events that occurred in that 5-year period, 6 of them were extreme weather-related events. Hurricane Ike, tornadoes in April 2011, Hurricane Irene, the Northeast snowstorm in October 2011, the derecho storms, and Hurricane Sandy. The main impacts of those events, which is 2/3 of the 9 events, was in distribution. And I think the way to address those issues are companies working with the state regulators and customers to ensure a readiness and preparation. We have a very robust mutual assistance program that we saw demonstrated in Sandy and the other storms. But I think we need to make sure, as Joe suggested, some additional things we can do to deal with flood issues and vegetation and distribution systems, and making sure that we're ready for those kinds of events. One of those 9 events was a weather-related event, but it was a severe cold in the Southwest, in Texas and the Southwest in February 2011. To me, that was avoidable, and it's also an event that we have well mitigated. We've made sure that generators and equipment, transmission equipment, have winterizer equipment. I think we saw much improved performance during the polar vortex events of this winter. Of those 9 large-scale events in the 5-year period, 2 were operational failures: the September 2011 Southwest blackout and the February 2008 Southwest Florida blackout. Those are the things that are in NERC's wheelhouse, and we're working very hard on those: human error, situational awareness, training, relay misoperations, and equipment failure. So I think we've got, that's NERC's principal role in the things that we're focused on, and I think we're doing a good job of managing those risks. So we have risks that we haven't seen. Of those 9 events, I've not mentioned a major cyber attack, major physical attack, or a solar disturbance that caused a major outage, and that is the case. But we still have to be concerned about these extreme, if you will, the black swan events that we have to be concerned about in the interest of the public. We did have a Metcalf event, but I would just remind everybody no load was lost during that event. So what are we doing in GMD? We have, with FERC's guidance, we've initiated a standard on solar magnetic disturbance. There's been a lot of technical work by industry to develop the engineering and science to protect the grid from solar magnetic disturbances since the March 1989 event that occurred in Quebec. We've produced the first version of the standard, which is an operational response, and we're getting the technical standard to the Commission by the end of the year to deal with protecting transformers and other equipment from large solar disturbances. A lot has been said by the previous panelists on physical and cyber security. I think these 2 are well managed by industry through NERC and through other organizations. We didn't start yesterday. We didn't start last year. At Metcalf, post 9/11, there's been a lot of work by industry to secure both the cyber and physical assets of the grid. We're the only, along with nuclear, the only critical sector that has mandatory standards. We're in the 5th generation of those standards. They're risk-based, security-based, and I think they'll help us manage where we need to get to in terms of cybersecurity. The Metcalf incident was serious. I wouldn't call it a game changer, but it's enough to raise the attention. I think prior to Metcalf, the focus was on securing assets and securing substation yards, but now we have to consider an attack on a physical asset as a means of doing harm to the grid or doing harm to the public, that it'll give us a fresh new look at the things we need to do. The FERC did issue us an order, and we intend to get that order in within the 90-day period that FERC has requested. We've done, I think Joe and Dwayne mentioned the Security Coordinating Council, where we have CEOs from industry working directly with government officials. We're working on incident response, information sharing, and getting tools out to industry that can help be prepared for physical and cybersecurity events. NERC operates the Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which provides real-time information regarding threats and vulnerabilities out to industry. The number of other activities, and I'll just sort of recap on the cyber, physical, and GMD area, that I think we have those well managed. In closing, I'll add 2 additional what I consider resiliency large-scale risks, but they're on the emerging side. One is we published a joint report with the California ISO last fall. It highlights a concern that I have that if we approach 20 to 30% of renewable or intermittent resources in a particular region or area, we've diminished the amount of base load, large rotating machines that provide traditional resources for inertia, frequency response, voltage control, voltage and power stability. These are the inherent values of the grid. And my concern is that as we reduce the amount of generation, large base load generation, the large rotating machines that provide those services, and we add more resources that provide intermittence availability but don't provide those additional reliability services, the equation is getting tipped. And I think the range is 20 to 30% penetration for me. So I would highly urge, before we get to a regrettable point in the introduction of renewables, is that we understand the underlying reliability services of the grid and make sure that these new emerging services can provide them through technology, provide these essential reliability services. My other emerging risk that I think we need to confront is the increasing dependence of the electric power system on gas as a just-in-time delivered fuel, subject to catastrophic disturbances potentially, and as we saw during the polar vortex, subject to competition with retail gas and lacking really long-term commitments and contracts to provide for electricity fuel. With that, I'll close, and thank you.
Thank you all. It seems like we heard from all of you that your systems are working, that they are robust, that we have a good system to start as we begin to look at our nation's infrastructure in transmission, storage, and distribution. But I'd like to ask each one of you if you would provide a specific recommendation to the QER task force on any executive or legislative actions that you think should be taken to fill any of the vulnerability gaps. Jerry, you talked about emerging risks, so why don't I let you start?
I had a few specific recommendations I would offer. One was tied to the last point about the variable resources. The technologies are there to equip wind and solar with frequency, power control, voltage control, ride-through capability. So I think we need to encourage and set the right market incentives for the deployment of those technical capabilities and ensure that there's equivalent pricing signals for the value of those reliability services. I can't emphasize enough the value of storage in having a successful transition to the social objectives that we set out for clean energy. Storage will be invaluable from a reliability and an operational perspective. NERC does not deal with gas, but FERC and I think the Department of Energy can work with the gas industry to ensure that we have sufficient pipeline capacity in the right place, that we're able to procure the market structures and contracts that we need for firm gas supply. And one that didn't get mentioned in terms of the physical security arena is I think there's a challenge in terms of spare equipment. I know industry has done a substantial amount of work in providing correctly located, strategically located equipment, particularly large-scale transformers. There's been a work on a research on a modular transformer. I fully encourage further work on that, and I think we have to get over the hurdle of how do we invest in that? Where's the capital for a strategic investment in spare transformers? I encourage the department to continue investing in synchrophaser technology, modernizing the high-level part of the grid. There are so many uses for that we don't even know yet. If you think about all the electronics we have in our communications world and our entertainment world, once you have the technology there, you can think of all the amazing things you can do with it. And I think the synchrophaser is one of those foundational enabling technologies. And finally, a recommendation would be, I mentioned that 2/3 of the largest events in a 5-year period were storms at the distribution and customer level, impacting and harming and causing pain to customers. We have to figure out how to make the distribution system more resilient. A dirty word that people don't like to listen to sometimes is a lot of it has to do with vegetation in the distribution area, but I think it's also helping customers have greater resilience and ability to get through those events. And I think a lot of the lessons were learned from Sandy were well documented in a DOE report. Deal with things like backup supplies to fuel stations and things like that. There was an enormous number of lessons that need to be implemented from that DOE report. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy?
I think we all mentioned hurricanes, and that's a significant issue for liquid pipelines when the power goes out. We've all learned from the past hurricanes and power outages. I commend to those working on the QER the Oil and Natural Gas Industry Preparedness Handbook, produced by API with many industry partners. There they talk about government and the private sector working together. An important way they should work together in the pipeline realm is a restoration of power service. It's important to restore power to those pump stations and those terminals if they have lost the power for lifting in order to keep people assured that there will be fuel supplies. So prioritization of pipelines and power. A more general sense, while there's 185,000 miles of liquids pipelines in the U.S. today, they're not all where they need to be because of the changing production trends. Either we don't have pipelines where there's new production of crude or natural gas liquids, or they're there and they're not in sufficient capacity. So in order to have the pipeline network that we need, in a time where there's great competition and commercial risk in pipelines, it's important to have the FERC policies and the congressional policies and the agencies that are involved with approving certain construction activities, all working together to make sure that we have the robust pipeline network that we need.
Joe?
Sure. I'll start with the positive. I think that the relationship of the industry and the federal government has evolved very, very well. We had a really great road test with the experience on Hurricane Sandy. I can remember sitting in a conference room and having the president on the call with us to bring to bear the resources that the industry needed and that could only be accomplished through the federal government. And I think that's a tremendous example and one that I would hope we can continue to build on. It was mentioned, I think Jerry mentioned as well as I did, that and Dwayne also, that the Electric Sector Coordinating Council is a very good construct to keep the dialogue going when we're not dealing with disasters and we're in front of it, and I think it's going to serve the industry very well. So hopefully we can continue to build on that. Just two comments that I would put more into the recommendation category is I feel strongly that we need to have legislation that provides for information sharing between the utility sector and the federal government with regard to cyber threats. We'll only be as good as the information that we can get in a timely way. That provides obviously the basis for us to prepare, to detect, to prevent, and then to respond. And then the other recommendation I would make is that we really need to continue to drill. I think Jerry made mention of the grid exercise. That was it was a very good experience. We learned a lot. We took some confidence of the things that we were doing well, but we also saw some real opportunities to continue to develop. And I think at the very top of that list is the ability to really understand that in the moment what the roles and the processes are, is that you're not trying to create them on the fly. We drill all the time within our company. The opportunity that I think NERC provided to do a broader drill was extremely valuable, and I think it's something we need to continue doing.
Dwayne?
I second that information sharing comment related to the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council. That council, I believe, is the model for other critical subsectors, and I want to applaud the government folks for working so closely with industry as they've done so far and providing the information sharing that they have, but more could be done. Now, speaking as someone that comes from the Midwest where our utilities are coal dependent, I would say we need to not move too quickly to eliminate coal from the mix, because as we have only one default baseload supply to fall back on when that's gone, and that is natural gas. Too much reliance on gas is reducing system reliability. We saw this already this winter when during the coldest days when we needed the gas the most to power our plants, it was either not available or was priced and offered to us at 1,000% above its normal price. That's not 100% higher, that's 1,000% higher. If you could get gas at all, you couldn't take it on the schedule when our electric customers needed it. There's a huge investment needed in gas supply infrastructure, and if we move too quickly, we'll reduce system reliability. We have a saying in Arkansas, the mix matters. Got the sticker right here on my iPad. If you're planning an investment for retirement, you would not take all your money and put it in Walmart stock, no matter how much you believe in Walmart. You would diversify your investment. In the same way, we wouldn't want to take all of our kids' future power supply resource for baseload power and put it in natural gas. We want to diversify that investment. That provides greater reliability and greater security. So we want to be able to keep all options on the table for the future power supply.
Peggy?
Yeah, when I think about this study, I look at it from a risk-based perspective, and I think you heard from all the speakers today sort of the overarching one that cuts across the energy and utility industry around cybersecurity and cyber attacks. So I do think that that ought to be a focus for work on this study and potential actions later. In terms of responding to natural disasters, from our sector, the single biggest issues are power distribution, as Andy talked about, restoring power. We've done a lot to provide interim electric generators, but having that interconnectivity between utilities and energy focused on the distribution systems and the resilience of those, I think, is a key factor. And lastly, one we haven't talked about is the human element. So we are a bit of a graying industry in terms of the age of our workforce. And, you know, in order to have the level of competence and expertise that we desire to have in these critical industries, we must continue to address both the intellectual needs from a STEM standpoint to drive the expertise in the industries, but also a big gap in skilled trades. And I would encourage the QER to reach out to the National Associations of Manufacturers that's running currently a task force on skilled trade development. That's all.
Thank you. Before I move on to the next question, do any of you all want to comment on what each other has said? I only heard one specific recommendation on legislation regarding information sharing on cyber. Anything else that you guys wanted to talk about in terms of specific recommendations?
Information sharing on cybersecurity, I think, is important for all of the energy sector. There was reference by Joe to the Electric Sector Coordination Council. I wanted to point out that there's an Oil and Natural Gas Sector Coordinating Council also that works very closely with DHS. The pipeline sector is a part of that. We work with TSA, which has issued pipeline security guidelines, and take that very seriously and work with TSA when they come and visit the facility and see their recommendations.
I just wanted to pick up on a point that Dwayne made. I absolutely endorse and support the issue of diversity of the mix going forward, and I would actually encourage a study of the value in terms of security and risk going forward of a diverse mix that includes nuclear, coal, and gas as primary sources of energy in a diverse mix. We don't know what the price of gas will be in 3 years or 5 years from now. We don't know the availability issues or the impact of exporting gas internationally. So I just absolutely think we need to evaluate and understand the value to customers in terms of reliability and security of a diverse fuel mix.
So let's talk a little more about the partnerships that industry and government have been undertaking. And Joe, I heard you say that we need more, but we heard about the National Petroleum Council's efforts. We heard about the ESCC and the NGCC and all of the cyber-related partnerships. Wondered if you all could talk a little bit about what is needed that isn't already happening? And what can this task force do to encourage further private-public partnerships and information sharing? And Joe, since your testimony talked about needing more, I'll jump to you first.
Okay, I wish John Rigby was here right now. I think where I would maybe go with that is that, you know, on the one hand, you know, obviously we are standalone commercial operations, but one of the tough things that we deal with is that at the end of the day, there is in fact a price tag that comes with all of this, and it's a very difficult topic to raise because if you just look in totality, the aggregate of the spend, and you realize that somehow or another you're either going to have to go out and raise the capital, and someone's going to have to pay for this. It becomes it becomes a part of the dialogue that's somewhat difficult to deliver because it does in fact have that impact. I think that to the extent that both at the federal and also at the state level, that there's an understanding and I think maybe a clear path with all level of prudence that should be applied to that spend, that there's some level of certainty that we can in fact make this investment, because that's really what in many ways this starts to come down to, that we're, you know, we do have aging infrastructure. We have opportunities to move into what some might call utility 2.0 as we leave utility 1.0. But at the end of the day, this all kind of boils down to resources being applied to make that future come about. And we have to balance that with the economic impacts of that to the end-use customer. And I think having an opportunity to dialogue with our federal and our state regulators in a way to kind of lay that path out would be of some real value. I'll just give you a quick anecdote. After the derecho in the summer of 2012 here in the district, I got a phone call from the mayor, and he said, you know, we can't have this anymore. We've got to deal with this. And I didn't think there was much opportunity to really do anything productive under the guise of a public-private partnership. And about 15 months later, we announced a $1 billion undergrounding project. Now, many would argue that that is not leading-edge technology. We're taking a line that's overhead, we're digging a hole and putting it underground. But the impact of that to day-to-day reliability to the retail customer is enormous. But it comes with a cost. It was a $1 billion investment. And we were able to work that conversation in such a way that ourselves and the city would split that investment. We would be able, the city is going to be able to use its AAA bond rating, and that the commission understood that where we were trying to go at the end of the day was simply to improve reliability and to minimize the extraordinary impact that extended outages have, not only to businesses, but to the lives of people. And as we went through that dialogue, we found ourselves standing on a whole lot more common ground than perhaps we were in the beginning. And the issue of the costs seemed to kind of come down in terms of its impact. And I think that's an example of the kind of dialogue we have to find this common ground to get to this future that we all want. So, you know, that's just a little more probably than you wanted to know around how I think, why I think partnerships are so critical in this environment.
Anyone else have a comment?
Well, I'm thinking about your question, Peggy, in the context of concerns about supply locally, and I'm thinking that education of the public and of governments, particularly state and local, is important, and the communication that we've all been talking about. We found that after Sandy and in concerns this winter about propane supplies, that it was important to help education about how the value chain works, how pipelines fit in there. No, we don't own the product. Yes, we need power. Yes, you can use pipeline capacity off-season to fill downstream propane storage. In those crucial hours of working together after Sandy, there was a lot of time spent to try and make sure people understood how this worked, and that there are not just a few electric utilities in the oil and gas sector. There's many different market participants all working together. So I'm confident that DOE can help paint that picture to the American people. and I encourage it too. And then communication, we need to work together on both propane and Sandy. There were regular conversations with DOE and the Energy Reliability Office and EIA, and that's vital. You all need to hear as quickly as you can what operators can tell you individually about supply, because I've heard great things from those crises about when government learns the situation and finds out that there's an opportunity for them to help. You helped. Thank you.
I would just add that following the Metcalf and the Little Rock deliberate acts of sabotage last year, we had meetings with government officials, legislators, FBI, Department of Homeland Security, White House, had meetings with Congress and with Senate in which the question was asked, is there a need for new legislation? And after we had the opportunity to brief those officials, many of those briefings in closed-door confidential hearings, I think they agreed there was not a need for additional legislation. We have a process that's in place between FERC and NERC that allows subject matter experts to vet reliability concerns and consider both the costs and the benefits. That avoids gold plating of the grid, or, you know, you could protect the substations with concrete walls around every substation, but you still have transmission lines running across the entire fruited plain. So if we could spend a lot of money and not really improve reliability, we have to be careful, and that's why I think the process we have in the partnership that's already in place works without the need for additional legislation.
I was going to say that I think almost every recommendation that you've heard this morning should start with private-public partnership, because I think they all engage industry and government in providing a common solution. A couple of examples I would highlight individually. One is the physical and cybersecurity area. I think we've seen through Metcalf and other incidents the invaluable partnership between law enforcement and industry. We can't look at securing the grid as an industry problem. It's a joint problem. And I think if I could pick only one thing to do, of all things, for security, I would make sure that the individual company is engaged very actively, proactively with the local law enforcement to make sure they have a good understanding of what the critical assets and vulnerabilities are, what responses are needed, and what help is needed. And I think that's an extremely valuable resource. The second specific suggestion would be, Joe and Dwayne hit on it, that in the last 2 years, the Electricity Sector's Coordinating Council has evolved to be, I think, a model. It has roughly 30 CEOs from industry, most senior levels of government involved, and we're focused on coming up with actions and solutions and holding ourselves accountable to get those done. So I think what I would suggest is that really needs to be expanded. If you look at any of the severe events we're talking about, if we look at Sandy, this is not an electricity-only issue. We need to get telecom, we need to get oil and gas involved, we need to have a broader conversation between industry and government at this level where we can identify the key issues and create our little tick list and go through and start working on things.
Yeah, I would add on to Jerry's comments from that regard. I think that, as Andy mentioned, there is an oil and gas sector council. The NPC study that's currently underway, I think, Peggy, what you hear is there's no need for, no view that we need additional legislations or additional partnerships, but how do we continue to make those work, the partnerships that we do have, work more effectively? And so one of the things that we're really focused on is making sure we have the most seamless interaction we can between national, state, and local governments during times of emergency, and improve our ability to give situational awareness to those government entities and seek faster response for getting things like waivers that would continue to help supply the energy system as quickly as possible following events. So there is an opportunity to improve the interactions between governments and our industry, and I think certainly the high recommendations that we get from the electric sector are worth considering taking a look at.
Could I piggyback on one thing Peggy mentioned? I thought Peggy made a really important point about the people in the industry. And just by way of background, I mean, I have probably 30–40% of my workforce that can retire in the next 2 to 3 years. I mean, it's at the craft level, it's all over the property. And I think that when we look at, I'll say, the broader issue of building the grid of the future and dealing with this, we should also look at this as a very unique opportunity to put people to work and not just give them jobs, but give them careers. That undergrounding project that I mentioned is going to spur 4,000 jobs. That's one project. And I think as we deal with the evolution of the industry, we should look at this as a unique opportunity from an economic point of view that it could really spur a tremendous amount of employment and can trigger relationships with universities to create cyber engineers, I mean, there's so many opportunities out there that I think are in front of us that can have an enormous impact to the economy.
Good point, thank you. So Joe, you raised the ugly issue of who pays, and it's one that we all struggle with. But rather than going down that road, specifically, I wanted to ask all of you to provide your suggestions on, are there financial incentives or market incentives or other incentives that you'd recommend for investment in resiliency and security? Who wants to tackle that one first?
Well, I brought it up. So, if I think about it in the context of our service territory, at the bulk power level, at the FERC level, I think we actually have a very good construct in place. We have formula rates that allow us to kind of match the spend with recovery in a fairly consistent manner. And that doesn't mean that we just get to do whatever we want to do. I mean, it has to pass muster. It's evaluated. I think just given the fact that we're in a time where, let's say, the incline of organic sales growth is flat, maybe even to negative, but the incline of the infrastructure investment need is actually fairly steep, you're not going to get as much, I'll say, near-term recovery of that steep incline by just natural organic sales. And that creates a problem. I think we're also dealing with the issue of obviously these are challenging economic times, but I think the overriding issue is that customers have made it very clear what their expectations are, and they're very real and very reasonable expectations of high-level reliability and a high-level ability to respond to issues. I think that, and I clearly feel that our state regulators are in a very difficult situation because they're trying to balance all these needs. I think there are states that have put in place recovery mechanisms that not necessarily incent, but I think provide a certainty of that path of recovery, of being able to work with the state regulators to come to a pre-agreement around what the spend will look like, what it will actually deliver, and to be held accountable for whether that happens or not. I think if we can move to more of these mechanisms across the country, at least certainly in my part of the world, it's going to provide more certainty for me to go to the capital market and to raise, we spend $1.3 billion a year in construction. I have to go raise that capital every year to make that happen and then seek recovery. I think to the extent that there's mechanisms in place that don't in any way diminish the regulatory oversight, I think that's something that I would really like to see put in place.
Dwayne, you mentioned affordability is your organization's driving foundation.
Yes.
You probably have some thoughts on this.
Well, I was just thinking, I have the privilege of reporting to a democratically elected board of directors as a nonprofit cooperative. We work for the members, and they own us. And so I face the people every month who pay the bill, and that's our regulator. That's our primary regulator. They remind me every month that they care about cost and reliability, and we have to balance the two of those. So when it comes to incentives, it's really, there's nobody else to pay. If we're going to improve the grid, the cost is either going to be paid by our ratepayers or by taxpayers. I'd prefer it be us and our ratepayers because we can make that cost-benefit evaluation. So every month, My board makes that evaluation. They're going to spend $500 million in Arkansas to upgrade the grid to improve reliability. That's their money they're spending. They're making that decision. They don't need any other incentive, and they can decide if they need to spend $1 billion to make it even more reliable, or is $500 million enough? I think keeping that in that local level makes a lot of sense.
Andy?
Liquid pipeline operators have the incentive today to invest in safety, to invest in resilience. During my spoken remarks, I said $1.6 billion was spent just in 2012 on safety. Operators want to make sure that these can be long-lived assets. The way liquid pipelines are regulated by FERC, cost recovery is not guaranteed. It's just an opportunity, and this is a period of pretty significant commercial risk, both in competition with other pipeline operators and with other modes. But right now, the incentives are working.
I won't try to repeat what Joe and Dwayne said, but I think this is another opportunity for the private-public partnership to understand in more rational terms what the risks are that we're trying to deal with. Sometimes we can get caught up in reactionary mode. You have a bad hurricane, you have a Superstorm Sandy. There's a call for sort of reactionary response. There's a lot of attention politically and publicly on cyber and physical security, and it's causing a lot of investment. My suggestion is that on both the government and industry side, we need to have fact-based risk analysis and understand what the options are and what the priorities are. And I think if we have a clear set of messages around that, I think the customers will understand where we're investing and why we're investing, and it'll help get the support that we need to do these things.
So the focus of this panel was on vulnerabilities. I want to ask one final question and then ask you each to kind of give a final set of comments. Is there anything that the federal government can do that it's not already doing with regard to filling the vulnerability gap? Again, thinking about this Quadrennial Energy Review is basically coming back to what the federal government can and cannot do in collaboration with industry and other stakeholders. But is there anything that you think the federal government should address that it's not already doing?
I'll take a first stab. First off, I think that the current trajectory toward a climate-based electricity grid future needs to be done in a way that recognizes physics of electricity and reliability. So I would encourage that as we think about targets and shifting resources, that we give due consideration for the provision of the reliability services that are going to be essential. I mean, the reasons why we're sitting here in this room and the lights aren't blinking and fading up and down as if we were in a tent somewhere in the middle of a third world area is because we have a very reliable grid that's held together by voltage, frequency, ride-through capability. There's a whole list of technical things that have to be done. So I think we need to make sure that we're going forward with our social and climate policy, making sure that we have a compatible reliability policy that's going to make it work so we don't have regrets down the road. Second thing I think we haven't done enough is storage is going to be invaluable with the forms of intermittent and variable resources that we have going forward. We've spent a long time on storage. We've been talking about it. I've been talking about it for 20 years. But we need to make it a reality. It's going to have to be available on the grid to displace some of the valuable larger rotating machines that we have. And then I would finally just say, I think we have to think of the value of the spare equipment, the modular, transportable equipment, particularly the transformers, whether or not, the difficulty there is just how much to invest, who invests, and whether we're willing to take the risk or whether we need the insurance policy of having something available. We've done a lot of the research. We've done a lot of the preparation. There are prototypes. The question is, do we do something?
Thank you. Anyone else?
I would just wanted to add on the topic of the spare transformers and that I think the government could do things to assist in encouraging domestic transformer production. There's one large manufacturer on U.S. soil today. The rest have all moved offshore, and it is a critical aspect of national security to have those spare transformers available and have the capability of manufacturing some of that critical equipment on our soil.
I was just going to maybe piggyback a little bit on what Jerry said. I think we have to balance the issues of the grid with the view of all of the above. I mean, I think renewables are very important, absolutely part of the portfolio, but I don't think they're the silver bullet. And I really liked what Jerry said, that you just have to also understand the physics of what's involved and how do you fit them into the macro grid that exists today, and that's a very complex issue.
Andy?
It's hard to get a deal to build a pipeline. Pipelines are expensive. People know it's going to take a while to build them. Pipeline operators want shippers to sign long-term contracts. When they finally get together and have the agreements necessary to underpin, we hope government will work with us efficiently so that we can get that built. Similarly, we need to attract capital into this business that's increasingly competitive. Projects are seemingly at risk commercially once the long-term contract's in. We need to be able to attract capital. When it comes to issues, that Oil and Gas Industry Preparedness Handbook talks about the need in times of potential crises for some waivers of government, for things like PHMSA operator qualification rules and fuel specifications and how storage tanks are regulated temporarily. You need to get into those issues to make sure that we can get the fuel necessary. And then we've talked about drills. It's important for government and pipeline operators to do drills together, to talk about how emergency response assets are deployed and how people communicate together, just to be ready, whether it's talking with DOE in terms of a storm or restoration of electric service, or in that unlikely event of a pipeline emergency, how government and operators can work together. Important.
Peggy?
So as everyone knows, the energy industry is undergoing tremendous transition with the additional production and capability of our country. That transition is happening very rapidly, and I think it demonstrates the industry's ability to respond and build new infrastructure. We put tremendous investments in the assets. It's a very asset-intensive, investment-heavy industry, and certainly it's to our best interest to invest in resiliency of those networks, which we continue to do. I think from a federal government standpoint, as Andy talked about, the ability to give us permits for all the new activities that's going on hastens the infrastructure build for our country. And I would also say that the thing we need most, and Joe talked a little bit about this, is we need certainty. Continuity and certainty of the regulatory environment for these assets is key. These are long-term assets, and they have a long life. And to attract the investment, to be able to build the resiliency in, we have to have continued certainty and continuity of the regulatory frameworks.
Sure.
That topic, I really appreciate you raising this certainty, because we have been in a very, I just want to applaud the DOE for hosting this Quadrennial Energy Review so that we can start to develop a national energy policy. We've been operating in the face of uncertainty for years, and in an environment of uncertainty, we make short-term decisions. Our grid should be planned for the next 50 years. We want to plan a reliable supply for our kids and our grandkids, and these facilities we build and invest in don't just last 5 or 10 years. They're built for 50 or 60 or 75 years. That kind of infrastructure needs long-term planning, and when we're forced into an environment of uncertainty, I can't go to my board and recommend they spend $500 million of their money on something that may or may not be a good idea in 5 years. If we know what the roadmap is, then we can make prudent investments for our kids and our grandkids, and our boards, my board, will be willing to make those investments. The risk is just too high under the current environment to make long-term plans. So we're all sitting and waiting, making short-term decisions, building peaking combustion turbines, because that's the cheapest and quickest thing we can do. That's not what's going to run our grid in the 21st and the 22nd century. It's going to be some kind of base load, and we can't make those decisions today. We're all waiting for a plan. So I just applaud, again, I applaud this forum and this chance to be part of developing a plan so we can all make good decisions for our kids and our grandkids.
So we've got 5 minutes left with Melanie sitting in the front row and the senior White House staff here. Is there any parting comments that you'd like for them to hear in the next 5 minutes?
I would simply, I'll state the obvious. We live in a really complex world. I mean, we got some tough issues in front of us. We kind of, I think we're standing in two places, the utility 1.0 and the 2.0. But I think that, and maybe to piggyback on what Dwayne said, I really applaud the DOE. I think that whenever you're trying to wrestle down a tough problem, the best way to do it is to invite a lot of diverse opinions into the room, encourage that tension, managed by facts, and then have a process that kind of winnows things down into something that's actionable where people can then take it and run. And hopefully that's what this is going to happen here, and I just really appreciate being able to play a small role in that process.
Thank you. With that, please join me in thanking this esteemed panel. Thank you all, and we'll get the stage set for panel 2, and we'll start right back in. Thank you. Because this is a panel you don't want to miss. We are honored and delighted to have on the panel Marty Durbin, who's President and CEO of America's Natural Gas Alliance, Dr. Robert Hartwig, President of the Insurance Information Institute, Robert Misbach, who is Vice President of Power Systems Group at Mitsubishi Electric Power Products, and Robert Blue, President of Dominion Virginia Power. I want to thank you all for coming, and Mr. Durbin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peggy. And let me first just thank both the White House and DOE for the invitation to be here today. Just to echo the comments of the earlier speakers, I think it is an incredible opportunity to have this group pulled together and to start this process of a quadrennial energy review. So again, thanks for the opportunity to be here. And just as a quick description, ANGA represents North America's leading independent E&P natural gas producers here in the United States. And our mission is frankly to promote the increased demand for and use of natural gas. But having said that, we're obviously very tied to, our success is tied to the rest of the energy infrastructure, from the pipelines to the LDCs and the rest there. So while I am not here speaking on behalf of either INGA or AGA or our other partners in the natural gas space, again, they are important partners with us moving forward, and I know they will be part of the discussions as this process moves along. As has been noted both in the opening speakers and elsewhere, that the United States is now the world's leading producer of natural gas. And what we've essentially seen in a very short time frame, incredible pace of change here that has just totally changed the landscape of our energy picture and the opportunity that we have. As pointed out in the materials for this meeting today, this new abundance of natural gas in the United States is not only creating jobs, it's powering a manufacturing renaissance. It's cleaning our air as we use more of it in power generation and other applications in transportation. And of course, giving us an opportunity to export natural gas, to our allies. That we certainly anticipate that being part of the conversation as we move forward. So, in essence, you could say if we want to look at what are some of the vulnerabilities we have going forward, I think one of the vulnerabilities is that we've got to make sure we take advantage of this opportunity we have to use this abundant, affordable, clean, and domestic resource. That more and more independent and government resources are being coming to the same conclusion. The gas is here. We are not supply constrained. As the previous panel and others have pointed out, there are certainly things that we need to look at from a standpoint of policy, from infrastructure, that can help us to smooth the edges of the distribution transmission system. But we are not at all living in an era of scarcity of resource when it comes to natural gas, and I think that needs to be a clear foundation as we move forward. Again, I think that the abundance of natural gas has helped to eliminate a lot of the long-assumed energy vulnerabilities, and it has been modern techniques, it's been technological innovation that's allowed us to pair horizontal drilling with hydraulic fracturing that has now resulted in a very highly efficient development of shale gas, where we're getting more and more production from fewer and fewer rigs. Just as a quick example, I think over the last 2.5 years, we've gone from having more than 900 natural gas dedicated drilling rigs in the United States. I think today we're around 320, perhaps even fewer. Yet production keeps increasing, and at a healthy pace as well. That's driven by technological innovation in the drilling and the production of the wells that we're currently drilling in. But also, obviously, as we've seen more production move to natural gas liquids and oil, we're getting associated gas there as well. So as the infrastructure comes along to be able to capture that gas with the oil production, yet another huge opportunity and supply there for us. Very little concern. Well, there's no concern about as demand starts to increase, our ability to be able to meet that demand. And it is important to note that it is that growing demand that is also driving the infrastructure development and the infrastructure investment. The pipeline companies through the INGA Foundation recently updated a study that we co-sponsored to show that over the next, between now and 2035, we'll need about $640 billion or $30 billion a year of investment to keep up with the outlook of natural gas and natural gas liquids. Important to note that that's private sector investment, and the industry, the natural gas industry and the pipeline industry, have a track record of investing that type of at that level to be able to meet the demands. So again, just in conclusion, I think we've got a real opportunity here with the diversity in geography of production, diversity in transmission and transportation of the fuel, new technologies coming along to help with both resilience, such as combined heat and power and other distributed generation opportunities. So we really look forward to working with both all of our partners here and with the administration on this dialogue going forward. Peggy, I will leave it there.
Thank you very much. Dr. Hartwig has PowerPoints. He's the only one that does today, so he's going to do these from the podium.
Right, so if you could bring that up, that would be great. That's not my PowerPoint up there, by the way. Totally blank screen. But anyway, while they're getting that up there, I'd like to thank you again for having this forum here. The DOE, really it is, and we've heard this several times, it is a critical point in our nation's energy history. And in an industry, in the insurance business where I am, it's clearly a critical point as well. The economy is changing. We have a fundamental industry in the economy that is changing very rapidly, I think in a way that we couldn't have anticipated maybe 5 years ago. Looks like they're still working on it back there. I can promise you it worked a couple hours ago as we came in.
It did.
You saw it. That's right. Well, I'll blabber on as they're doing that. A couple of things here. When we think about some of the greatest threats that in the insurance industry that we see, when it comes to the issue of the energy business. And for us, the energy business, we think about it on a global scale. It is very much a global business, and the expertise in underwriting and pricing these risks, while we're talking here specifically about the U.S., it kind of takes a village to do it, and it takes a global village. And we're talking about seeing many of the similar sorts of risks here in the United States that we see elsewhere in the world, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Asia, whether it's in the North Sea, whether it's in very, very dangerous parts of the world, such as we think about the gas pipelines that are in areas that are very political hotspots right now, such as the Ukraine and many other places like that. I think we heard on the prior panel that, is that going to work? Yeah? Oh, there we go. Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, good. All right, so, and very quickly, there's a number of slides here. You can download them from our website right now, and I'm sure that they'll be posting them to the DOE QER website a little bit later. Quickly here, this is, as I mentioned, energy is a huge business for us in the insurance world on a global scale, but right here in the United States as well. It's one of the ones that we look at as a real long-term growth play. We heard earlier on about investing for the next 30, 40, 50 years, not the next 5 or 10. That's how we look at this. And when we summarize the energy markets today, well, we see it's one of the largest sectors that we deal with, and we have extensive experience and solutions in this particular area. But as I said, it's very comprehensive. We're talking about everything from extraction, both onshore and offshore, refining and storage, transportation, which is a very big issue right now when we talk about marine, rail, trucking, and the exposures that go on there, generation in the area of electricity, renewables, more recently, of course, but also areas that we didn't talk about at any of the other panels. We have a lot of exposure in the workers' compensation side of the business, as well as management liability, things like directors and officers policies, those sorts of things for the kind of decisions that can ultimately result in lawsuits against the management of a company. Typically, for many of the utilities and other energy producers and others that are out there, multi-billion-dollar limits are what are needed, and we can put those up as a matter of course in this business, both property and liability exposures. And we have risk-sensitive pricing in the business, and that provides proper incentives, I think, to mitigate and to produce the kinds of results we're talking about here today. You're rewarded for your superior experience. Now, the results can be very volatile, both because of the exposure to natural catastrophes and because just things happen in this business. And insurers, however, work extremely closely with risk managers. I would say that the energy business has really top-notch risk management departments, and insurers work with underwriters and work with the brokers who are involved as well to make sure to try to keep these risks to a minimum, and that can help keep costs down to a minimum as well, and adverse outcomes, of course, to a minimum. Now, the market, as I mentioned, is in my, before this came up, truly global. A substantial share of the underwriting capacity for this business actually comes from offshore. And as I mentioned, we have a history of working very, very closely, working to help stimulate innovative risk management programs in companies, and using price in part as a tool to get the right outcomes, and it's a win-win-win situation for everybody there. You know, just quickly to take a look at that, we heard a lot about discussion about these things, but looking forward, okay, it's an energy-hungry world, and we in the United States are going to be able to take advantage of this in a way we couldn't even envision 5 years ago through our domestic production of gas and oil, and hopefully an increased ability to export that in the future. And instead of importing as much as we do, of course, we're going to be exporting that. That means a huge development in infrastructure is needed in this country, as well as upgrading of infrastructure. And you can see whether it's investment in global energy infrastructure, not just the U.S. here, but global, whether it's natural gas, oil, and then in the electrical generation realm as well. Right here in the U.S., however, you could see that our demand for electricity is going to go nowhere but up. I'm an economist by training, and this is one of the few predictions I can give you with absolute certainty, is that we are going to remain an ever increasingly energy-hungry world, and whether that's electricity or what have you. But you do see, this is by fuel source, so you do see increasing shares, particularly in the area of natural gas, and you heard a lot about that. It's been past couple of years have been very difficult for utilities and their insurers alike. Whether it was, as we heard, a Hurricane Irene or the Snowtober blizzard, and all of these, there you can see down power lines or the derecho, or whether it was Superstorm Sandy, and there are going to be more of these events. We heard, of course, about this year's polar vortex. You know, in terms of causing losses, not necessarily specific to energy, but we do see the preponderance of loss from natural disasters is going to be, in this country anyway, from hurricanes and tropical storms. Secondarily, in recent years, in terms of dollars, from tornadic events, that's increasing very rapidly, and then winter storms come in number 3. That may not be exactly the same breakdown when it comes, although I think hurricanes might be number 1 and maybe winter storms number 2. It depends on where you are in the country. And I skipped over that, but geological events. We haven't had a major earthquake in this country in 20 years. Look at what happened to Japan after a major earthquake and tsunami, so we have to bear that in mind as well. Many of these events cost enormous damage to the energy infrastructure. As we mentioned, you know, Sandy earlier on, but many of these hurricanes in prior years. These are the most damaging events from our perspective. But when you look at this, this is going in one direction and up. You could see natural gas production in this country over the past 110 years. And in fact, a lot goes along with this. I talked about employment exposures. The number of people employed in oil and gas extraction today is the highest it's been since 1986. So that's important to, and so there you see the equivalent on the oil production side. So a lot of exposures there for the property casualty insurance industry, and I can tell you we're there to be able to insure that and to make sure that, that these facilities, to help them become safer, but also when the unthinkable does happen, we are there standing behind them. Quickly, a couple of concerns that I have as I close right here. Grid vulnerability, we heard a lot about that, and in particular for us, we're thinking a lot right here in Washington, D.C. about the expiration of the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act that expires at the end of this year. Most of the energy industry benefits from that in that they buy coverages that are backed for terrorism risk and are part of this program that's just been in place since 2012. Pipeline risks, those are out there, and I think they're well contained, and there's insurance solutions. Also, offshore risks, post-Deepwater Horizon remain a concern. New frontiers, Arctic pollution, okay, that being one of the new frontiers out there as well. Rail transportation, certainly a concern in the wake of several, unfortunately, deadly and costly events that have occurred, including Canada and in the United States. And then the issue of cyber, we heard a lot about that. That is a sort of a new type of product that is coming out. I would say it's in terms of the types of cyber products that protect against physical damage. That is something that is, I think, just over the horizon. Programs are being put together that cobble together coverage for terrorism, sabotage, political risk, violence, all of those sorts of things. Coming together, hopefully, with programs, but we're going to have to work closely with the federal government and with the energy industry to make sure we can put these things together. So that quickly does conclude my comments here, but just to conclude, we very much appreciate the DOA holding this forum and look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Mr. Misbach?
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Misbach, in charge of the Power Systems Group at Mitsubishi Electric Power Products. Thank you for inviting me here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate on this first public meeting of the Quadrennial Energy Review and serve on this panel. Mitsubishi Electric is a global company of 120,000 employees worldwide. Our energy infrastructure products include the high-voltage transformers and circuit breakers that form the backbone of the U.S. grid. We've been supplying this critical equipment to U.S. utilities for over 50 years, and for the last 25 of those years, we've been manufacturing it locally in Pittsburgh. We also offer our customers advanced energy solutions such as solar panels, smart grid systems, and power electronics technologies that facilitate the deployment of renewable generation such as wind and solar power. Today, I'd like to focus my remarks on the investments that my company is making to help our customers strengthen the physical grid security and cost-effectively integrate renewable energy into the U.S. electricity grid. Mitsubishi Electric has invested over $90 million in a smart grid demonstration project at 3 of our factories in Japan. We've used this to learn how to transform wind and solar energy into high-quality, stable power that can satisfy demanding industrial and residential applications using advanced controls, power electronics, and energy storage. Our customers are excited by the value this could create in their systems, and we're exploring several similar projects here in the United States. Last April, we opened a new factory in Memphis, Tennessee, which represents an investment of over $220 million. This is the largest transformer factory in the United States, and it is the only one that can make the highest voltage transformers used in the electric grid. The transformers manufactured in Memphis support high-voltage transmission facilities which enable large quantities of power generated by wind or other low-cost sources to be transported long distances to reach large cities where it's needed. We selected Memphis as the site of this factory for several reasons, but none more important than the logistical and strategic advantages that it provides. In Memphis, we have access to all 5 major interstate rail carriers and barge access to the Mississippi River, which facilitates efficient transportation of these large transformers. Large transformers are a major investment for utility, and they take a long time to build and ship. By manufacturing in Memphis, we have taken a major step in shortening the response time to an event that threatens the integrity of the grid by reducing the time to transport a critical machine to our customers from several months to as little as 1 week. The attack on the Metcalf substation in San Jose occurred 1 week before we opened the Memphis plant and brought increased focus by our utility customers to the exposure of the grid to man-made threats. We're collaborating with all of our utility partners to harden both our products and their substations against potential attacks and natural risks like geomagnetically induced current events. We were among the first to test transformers to understand the risks posed by the geomagnetically induced currents. We have standardized on a GIC-resistant design so that all units made in Memphis will withstand a GIC event. We've also undertaken new technology initiatives to support grid resiliency, including the development of mobile gas-insulated substations, a universal spare recovery transformer, and a smart transformer that improves the survivability and resiliency of this critical equipment. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to working with the Department of Energy and to all of the stakeholders in the power sector.
Thank you, Mr. Blue.
Good afternoon. I'd like to start by commending the White House and DOE for soliciting a wide range of viewpoints on energy policy, if not a wide range of first names among the panelists on this panel today. My name is Bob Blue, and I'm president of Dominion Virginia Power. My company is an operating segment of Dominion Resources, and we serve about 2.5 million retail electric customers in Virginia and North Carolina. Dominion's business ventures take it into many aspects of today's energy industry: electric transmission and distribution, a fleet of merchant generation stations using fuel sources as diverse as wind, fuel cells, and nuclear power, an extensive system of natural gas pipelines, storage and processing facilities, and local gas distribution companies. We provide electric service to some of our nation's most vital defense and security facilities, including the Pentagon, the world's largest naval base in Hampton Roads, and a host of security and military installations in Northern Virginia. Our performance directly affects their mission success. I'd like to share with you some of Dominion's programs to protect against threats, deal with challenges, and ensure the reliable delivery of energy. I'll begin with physical security. Dominion shares FERC's concern for the grid's physical safety. We commend the Commission for its March order on protection standards, and we are an active participant in the North American Electric Reliability Corporation's process to develop those standards. We're confident that they will be thoughtful, well-designed, and give individual transmission operators the latitude they need to implement necessary protective actions. Given the national security importance of the facilities in our service territory, Dominion may need to make some unique changes to safeguard our infrastructure. Well before FERC issued its order, we were taking concrete steps. Last September, we announced a plan to spend up to $500 million to better protect critical substation equipment and heighten security. We will also build a new systems operations center at a separate and secure site to house the infrastructure needed to manage our grid and ensure reliability. Back in the last decade, we developed a program to ensure that we have a supply of spare transformers that can be quickly put into service during emergencies, such as physical attacks or storms. And by using a manufacturer here in the U.S., I think we were Mitsubishi's first customer, if not one of the first, if not the first. We're supporting domestic industry and jobs. In addition to physical security, we continue to focus on potential cybersecurity threats. Our protective efforts take many different forms: intrusion detection capabilities, network boundary protections, malware protection, cybersecurity training. We continuously monitor threats, giving us the capability to adjust protective measures as new dangers arise. Our ability to respond is helped greatly by our close collaboration with the Department of Energy, other federal agencies, and our peer energy companies. We agree that the best protection for the grid is a government-industry partnership based on trust and real-time information sharing. And I would add that liability protection for those of us in the private sector working with appropriate government agencies must be a key part of that relationship. Dominion's also well aware of the threats that weather, most notably severe storms, pose to our system. 3 of the worst storms to affect our electric service territory have happened since 2003. After each, we carefully evaluated their impacts on our system. Based on those assessments, we've hardened our infrastructure and improved restoration. One of the key improvements has been our emergency response communications with local governments and regional authorities. We're also making physical improvements. Undoubtedly, the biggest program is our effort to place up to 4,000 miles of vulnerable overhead distribution lines underground. When completed, this program will reduce by half the time required to restore service to all customers after major storms. We've also worked with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to assess flooding threats to critical infrastructure. Whenever new substations are built or existing ones rebuilt, they are constructed to withstand 500-year flood events. Finally, the changing nature of our country's power supply poses threats in and of itself. One aspect is the rapidly growing dependence on natural gas for power generation. New demands for gas have put unprecedented strain on pipelines. Capacity on the existing pipes is sometimes inadequate to meet residential and commercial needs, along with generation. A case in point was this winter's polar vortex. In just one day, from January 6 to 7, the average price on the Transco Zone 5 hub, serving many of our plants in Virginia, increased by more than 550%. Fortunately, we avoided power curtailments or service problems, thanks in large measure to a diverse fleet. But January, with its supply constraints and soaring prices, sent a clear signal. Federal policies must support private industry's efforts to expand the natural gas pipeline network. I'll conclude by summarizing a few of our recommendations. Information sharing and collaboration between the energy industry and government must be a top priority. It's critical to our ability to assess threats and respond to them. Regulators must develop policies favorable to siting and permitting new infrastructure. As we found with the gas transmission network, in many cases, major elements of the energy system are not equipped to handle today's challenge. And one of the prime ways government can promote new infrastructure is by developing policies that offer fair, reasonable, and certain returns on investment. This is essential to attracting private capital to the development of needed new energy projects. Thanks for including me in today's panel, and I look forward to a productive and informative session.
Thank you all. I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked the first panel starting out, and that is, can you provide the QER task force with some specific recommendations, as Bob Blue did at the end of his comments, on whether or not you think there should be any specific executive or legislative actions needed to fill the vulnerability gaps. And Marty, why don't you give it a try?
Okay, happy to do that. You know, and some of this will be certainly building on what we heard both on the first panel and from folks here. No, at this point, this early in the conversation where I've got a specific, we ought to have an executive order that does the following. But again, I think these are the important conversations that have to happen now. I do think, as Peggy Montana mentioned on the previous panel, and API has pointed out, that to make sure we're looking at work that has been done and is ongoing with the National Petroleum Council. Again, I understand that is a part of the plan. Just to highlight that, and then several of the panelists have pointed out the need to ensure, both from a certainty standpoint and just to make sure these things get done. I think there is room for better coordination among the agencies and streamlining of the permitting process. We know how quickly things have moved here, just speaking about the natural gas space, and how that's going to continue. Being able to keep up with the infrastructure needs, as Mr. Blue just pointed out as well. I said Mr. Blue because if I said Bob, I don't know one will know. So that's another potential opportunity. I also think, just more broadly too, there's an opportunity here for the administration, and not just this administration, but government officials in general, to help in the call it a broader education, if you will, both the public and policymakers on both. There's a lot of energy education across the board, that's needed in the country. A lot of that falls on us as industry, different parts of industry, and we're doing that. But I also think that it's critical that the policymakers can play a role there to be very clear with the public about the demonstrated safe use, production, and just to be able to explain the needs here, the critical needs, and why we're going to have to move forward in these different areas. I'll stop there.
Dr. Hartwig?
It doesn't light up. There we go. All right, thank you. All kinds of technological problems here. There is electricity flowing to this mic, though. I'm glad to be able to say. All right. Well, thank you very much. And I sort of come at this from a little bit of a different angle, as I mentioned, being in the insurance industry. And I noted that I was the only one to mention the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act. Because maybe not everyone in this audience is familiar with it, and I'm the only one talking about it. That program, which began in November of 2002 and has had 2 extensions, and this most recent extension expires at the end of this year. This is a program which is a public-private partnership which helped to restore stability to the insurance and reinsurance markets in the wake of 9/11, when effectively acts of terrorism were almost universally excluded from policies in the wake of that event. That program has allowed the market to stabilize. It has done so at no cost to taxpayers. Let me say that again, no cost to taxpayers. And it continues to provide benefits to the market and to the economy overall. Where we're headed right now is that if you have a policy that perhaps, let's say it's up for renewal on May 1st, you'll continue the coverage as is through the end of the year, and then you're very likely to have an exclusion pop up as of January 1st of next year, or you're possibly might be able to go out in the market, excuse me, and get a very limited amount of what might be relatively narrow coverage out there that wouldn't cover such things as workers' compensation exposures, for example. So this is a very rare example of a government, of a program, a public-private partnership that's worked. It's worked flawlessly for the past 11 and a half years now, and done so at no cost to taxpayers, and it can continue to operate in that realm. So that would be kind of number one and number two. There are some other issues I hadn't heard addressed. We're very concerned about this. We stand on the receiving end of a lot of litigation and lawsuits. And to the extent that tort reforms are maintained at the federal level, whether it's class actions or working at the state level to try to get some sanity in a few of these states, there are states where the tort system is just absolutely atrocious. It's an international embarrassment, and it hurts us competitively, and it hurts every industry, including the energy business, and it hurts their insurers. It drives up the cost of coverages needlessly. That being said, I would like states to be aware, and the federal government to be aware, that when we're talking about pipelines, and we're talking about new kinds of energy infrastructure, there are insurance solutions behind those risk management solutions, and your risk management solutions to bring the likelihood and the severity of events that do occur down to an absolute minimum. But behind all of that, there are insurance solutions. And so one thing I'd like the public policymakers, both at the federal and the state level, to know is that when it comes to, say, environmental issues or property damage issues or even in cases of the loss of life, there are insurance solutions out there. But the tort system absolutely needs to remain in check.
Thank you. Mr. Misbach?
Yeah, I just have a couple of observations. The one thing about, and I would say broadly about legislation and standards, is that I think one has to be careful that that standards and legislation does not inadvertently prevent new technology. I think one of the gentleman from NERC in the last panel alluded to situations where that is happening. For instance, some of these standards which have become somewhat outdated, which govern how solar and wind power is connected to the grid, is actually preventing the full capability of those systems to increase stability on the grid, right? So number one observation, I think, is that one has to be careful when writing standards and legislation to make sure you're not preventing new technology from flowing into the system. The other thing is that what we see with looking at our customers' behavior is it seems like the kinds of legislation that produces the fastest result and the best result is usually incentives. When FERC put into place, when FERC decided, for instance, that it would be to the country's benefit to reinforce the high voltage grid to stimulate competition among generation, they put in place incentives, and we really did see quite an increase in spending and projects from our customers in building new transmission lines. So I would say the same, the same general philosophy would apply to reinforcing the resiliency of the grid.
Terrific, thank you. Mr. Blue?
I mentioned some of our specific thoughts in my prepared remarks, but I might suggest that it's important to take a step back, and any policies that are pursued at the federal or state level need to recognize the value of the grid. I have 3,800 colleagues at Dominion, Virginia Power, who get up every morning and often stay up late into the night with the sole objective of making sure that when our customers turn the light switch, the lights come on. And now we're asking the grid to do an awful lot. We're, with environmental regulations, transforming generation fleets in many cases, shutting down coal plants for a variety of reasons, moving to more natural gas-fired generation, trying to incorporate renewables, trying to harden the grid to withstand cyber attacks or physical attacks or more severe weather, all while on the distribution side of things, trying to make sure that we can incorporate new technologies like distributed generation and microgrids. All of these individually would be challenges. Trying to do all of that at one time is a particular challenge. And I think it's important for policymakers to recognize the value of reliability today. I know it seems obvious, but I think sometimes it gets lost in the debate that we need to make sure that companies have the regulatory certainty and the incentives, financial incentives to invest in the grid today and reliability today. And I also think it's important for policymakers to recognize the value of the grid financially as customers look at different ways of being connected or not connected to the grid, that we're fair to everyone and that everyone who benefits from the grid pays for part of it. So fundamentally, I think regulatory certainty and making sure that all these different policies don't conflict is incredibly important. And so I commend this process because I think it has the ability to take a look at all of that and make sure we're not asking for conflicting objectives for those of us who are going to end up responding to that policy.
Thank you. So I heard a lot of you talk about the emergence of new technologies and the value that they have. As you know, one of the many goals of the QER is to look at where federal research dollars are going to be going. And so I'd like to ask you each to give us your perspective on where you think R&D should be undertaken with regard to risk mitigation, recovery, and security by the federal government and by industry in a public-private partnership. So R&D is the question. Mr. Misbach, you talked about emerging technologies. I'll let you take the first stab.
Well, I think let me cover it kind of area by area. In the area of renewables integration, most of our R&D is going into power electronic technology because it's very power electronics technology is a key enabler in energy storage. It's a key enabler in wind and solar power. Anytime you're trying to connect an intermittent source or a DC, a direct current source of energy to the grid, power electronics is going to be very valuable. In the area of grid security, we're really looking at several different areas. One is, of course, protecting the equipment, hardening the equipment. Another area is making the equipment smaller and transportable, so you can make it more cost-effective for people to have spare components that can be used in many places in their system. That's kind of new, right? Because most, in most utility applications, people build things, large things that aren't intended to move, right? So the idea of having a mobile substation, for instance, is somewhat new. And then monitoring and diagnostic technology, we think can be very valuable because it can protect equipment from, it can shut equipment off essentially before it fails catastrophically, so that you can minimize the effect of a catastrophic event and keep it from, make a small event, keep a small event from growing into a big catastrophe where one event triggers another.
Marty, you want to give it a try?
Well, I guess I would just note that there's obviously a lot of private sector R&D going on in this area, but one area I think that is certainly promising in the area of resilience and again, not that it's brand new, but, you know, distributed generation opportunities and different options like combined heat and power. I mean, we certainly saw, and I think it even put in my written comments, but, you know, during the Superstorm Sandy, and you had both universities, hospitals, and others that did have an opportunity to go in what they call island mode, and were able to keep, you know, keep power going, even as the grid around them was, you know, was not on. Obviously, it's going to take a lot of coordination with the existing generators and the power grid itself. But again, if we're looking forward at opportunities for resilience and just efficiencies as well, I think that is a promising area.
Maybe I'll make a little comment on this as well. In terms of R&D, actually, I know the administration is doing a lot of good work right now on natural catastrophe mitigation. I think that benefits everybody, and I think that when you look at, for example, not only at the federal level, but the state level and the city level, I work in New York City, looking at the vulnerabilities in a city like that, and when you protect the power grid, you wind up protecting the transportation system. People like me every day, we are electric dependent. I go to work every day in an electric vehicle. It's called a subway, okay? And when the electricity's not running, okay, I have a problem. And so does everybody else. And so when we look holistically at natural catastrophe protection, the power grid is one part of it, but that is really what is standing behind, particularly in major cities, major systems that, you know, like transportation, air traffic control, many others on which we're all dependent. The other one, and it can or may or may not be always part of cyber, but I bring up cyber once again because of the fact that you can think about a cyber attack bringing down perhaps a particular generation facility, but I think I heard Bob, to my right, Bob, talk about the fact that this could contribute to cascading events. And if you poll CEOs in the world today, you'll find that the number one concern is actually what they call supply chain disruption. And it may be this event didn't happen to them, but in today's interconnected, just-in-time world, if you pull down part of the power grid, you're going to wind up pulling down a much larger part of the economy in many cases. And that's a vulnerability that corporate America is very, very worried about. And I don't think we completely understand the interconnectedness that we have right now and the sort of cascading effects that might occur. So that kind of research into the kind of mitigation, prevention, and avoidance of those kind of scenarios is helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think DOE currently provides some research funding to universities, to vendors of companies like ours on cybersecurity products that can be valuable for us to prevent or stop cybersecurity attacks. I think that's valuable research that could be kept moving forward. And then one other area, you know, for us, if we have a major disruption, a concern would be disruption of the communications network. Our ability to talk to each other as we try to deal with whatever has happened to the grid is extremely important. And that's not an area of expertise for us, but someone researching ways that we would still be able to communicate in the event of something like that would be very valuable.
Thank you. So we've heard a lot today about security, whether it's physical or cyber. What we've not talked about yet, and what I'd like the panel's opinion on, is there's all levels of government who have responsibility for those issues. How can this Quadrennial Energy Review address the conflicts, the inherent conflicts that are there amongst federal, state, and local governments with regard to security? Are there some recommendations you can provide in that kind of collaboration?
You know, again, Peggy, being early in the conversation, I think it's hard to drill down to, you know, here's exactly what has to happen. But I don't think there's any question that a process like this will help identify where those problems or challenges or potentially the opportunities are for better communication. I do think, though, that going back to some of the earlier comments on the earlier panel, is that I think the QER process has also got to be very clear about what is its mission, how expanded should it be. I'm not suggesting they shouldn't play a role in trying to help coordinate across different levels of government, but again, whether or not that's solving all the problems or providing a venue where we can identify them and then kind of go to the next step. But I do think clearly even some of the challenges and opportunities that have been discussed with regard to natural gas playing a bigger role. That's not just a federal issue. It's at the state public utility commissions. It's with NARUC. It's with the regional transmission organizations as well as FERC. So now that's more of a policy side, but still there's a need for that collaboration across the different levels of government. But again, for a specific mission of the QER, I would just be careful not to try to pull too much into its mission.
And a quick point here, I'm familiar with another initiative that's underway, and I'm not sure if your initiative is coordinated with it or not. The Department of Homeland Security. I mean, security is in their name. They take this issue very seriously as well. They look at it in a much broader sense, the vulnerability not only just to the power grid, but to many other dimensions of the economy, and I think they rightly so. And I think that the QER and the DOE would fit squarely within this. You have to look at a reliable power grid as being part of this nation's homeland security, and that's why in part I view maintaining a viable insurance market in an environment where you're prone to terrorism risk as part of this nation's national economic security. So I don't know to what degree there's a coordination with DHS. I assume there's some, but I don't know the extent of it.
Yeah, just to give you some clarity, as the Secretary said this morning, there are 14 or 15 federal agencies involved in this effort, and the Department of Energy is acting as the executive secretariat, but is working quite closely with DHS. So thank you for that recommendation. Anyone else?
Well, I would just say, that particularly on the cyber side of things, over the course of the past couple years, I think there's been much better communication between industry and the federal government, and I give a great deal of credit to both sides to share information, because after all, that's going to be the real key to successful efforts, is sharing information across the industry, and having a successful communication with the federal government is essential to that. I think on physical security, we have found very good coordination among law enforcement at the local, state, and federal level as we have sought to address that. I wouldn't leave out the coordination within the federal government. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of different policies that are affecting the electric system and energy infrastructure generally, some on the environmental side, some on the security side. And so I think this is a wonderful opportunity through this process to make sure that there is some unified thinking about what are the goals that we're after, what are the priorities, how fast do we want to try to implement them. And so I think this provides the process that you all are undertaking provides a great opportunity to do that.
So one last question. Several of you talked about the importance of hardening the grid, and we've got new technologies coming into the grid, whether they're renewables or storage or electric vehicles. Talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on that, how those new technologies are going to impact the need to harden the grid.
Well, maybe I'll start. I got to harden this microphone here. Okay, I think that as I sort of mentioned earlier on, this issue of cascading effects, okay, and the interconnectedness you talked about. I mentioned I commute in an electric vehicle every day, okay, called the subway. Okay, if you commute it actually from anywhere in the suburbs, you're going to commute mostly on electric lines, and that's probably likely going to be increasingly the case as we have more reliance on mass transportation. If you haven't noticed the numbers coming out of Detroit, we've probably hit what many people call peak auto, all right, which is in terms of the actual number of vehicles that are out there and the number of vehicles, miles that are being driven. And increasingly, we see the usage of gas falling. And in part, that's not only due to increased fuel efficiency that's going to be increased, also due to the increased use of natural gas, first in fleet vehicles and ultimately, and then electricity ultimately in cars. So I think we have to be very cautious here. This interconnectedness is something I think that we probably underestimate. And so the grid itself, or whatever you want to call it, is going to be more and more important as we go forward in this increasingly digitized society. Just one last anecdote. Last year's largest major natural disaster was Moore, Oklahoma, a tornado there. $2 billion in insured losses. That very same town in 1999 had been hit by a tornado. Do you know what they did after that with the power lines? They buried them. Okay. Do you know what helped that town get back on its feet faster than it could have beforehand? All the utilities were underground. It was extraordinary to see that. I was there on the scene 48 hours afterwards and said, "Where are all the wires?" Well, they were exactly where they should have been. They were underground. So the house wasn't there, but the electrical infrastructure was still there, and that was great news to see. That wasn't technology. That was pretty low-hanging fruit, but I think we could do a lot more of that in the country.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I think there is some school of thought that more microgrids, more distributed generation will somehow reduce the need for the more centralized grid for the large bulk power system that we have. I don't think that's right. I think that people are going to remain reliant on that system. There will certainly, new technologies will advance. There will be changes. We will integrate those changes. But I think we're a long ways from the day where people are going to be divorced from the central grid. And so we need to make sure that we're investing appropriately in that. I know Joe Rigby talked about the FERC formula rates and transmission investments, and I think he's exactly right. I think that system works well. We're investing in our transmission system at Dominion Virginia Power. But I think centrally, to get back to something that I said earlier, while we think about these new technologies coming onto the system, we shouldn't forget about the reliability of the system as it stands today and in the near future. That's going to require investments both at the transmission and distribution level, and obviously recognizing the change in the generation fleet will require investments there. So I think the new technologies actually emphasize the need for investments in the grid.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. The grid today is more interconnected than it's ever been. I mean, if you go back 50 years, very little power flowed from one utility to the other utility. Today, huge amounts of power cross the country. And if you look at the way it's evolving, the highly efficient gas-fired combined cycle plants that are being built today are very large plants. Most of them, many of them over 2,000 megawatts. So just as big as large coal or nuclear plants. The very efficient, best wind resources in the country, the wind farms that have been built in Texas and the Midwest to take advantage of those things are far away from load centers. So you have, more than ever now, you have large quantities of power moving across the country. Yes, there is a lot of promise for distributed generation like solar, but for many, many, many years to come, I think the electric grid is going to be increasing in its importance to the country, not decreasing.
We've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to give you all the same opportunity that I gave the last panel with some important people sitting in the audience. Do you have any final specific recommendations for the White House or the Department of Energy as they undertake this extensive review? Short and sweet.
I don't have any specific advice that we haven't already captured here, but I did want to, just as a final thought, to all of this. Number one, since I raised the idea of distributed generation, obviously I was thinking about naturally gas powered, but I agree with you completely. It's not a matter of replacing; it's integrating with the centrally powered system. It came up several times earlier as well about the issue of fuel diversity and concerns about putting all of our eggs in one basket in natural gas. And I would just say, I don't want to call it a red herring, but I think that it's an overstated concern. There's no question, and I completely agree, the way that the things have come so quickly, it has been disruptive to the existing market and existing commercial arrangements. There are infrastructure constraints. And again, Mr. Blue identified a specific issue and concern that happened, in January, where we did have, some spot prices. Now, the good news is that was only about 1% of the sales those days. So I'm not saying it's not an issue. I'm saying it's not. We don't have a supply problem. And right now, if you look at, I've taken to looking at individual utilities and seeing what the pie chart looks like of their fuel diversity 5 years ago and what it is today. And it was far less diverse, 5 years ago. Not to pick on any fuel source, but I think natural gas is actually providing diversity to the system, but we've got to do it right, and we've got to make sure that we can fix those infrastructure and policy and commercial arrangement issues so that we can smooth those rough surfaces. Thanks.
Just very quickly, something I mentioned before, just to the administration, make the terrorism risk reauthorization of that act a priority. Get it passed ASAP. There's already a bill. There's been bills that were introduced last year, 3 bills. Looks like there's one coming out of the Senate very, very shortly. And do so now while you can avoid greater disruptions in the overall economy, or God forbid, allowing it to lapse and something happens next year or beyond.
So I liked one of the things that Mr. Hiley in the first panel emphasized is that to stay positive. I mean, I think if you sum up what you've heard today, the United States has the more low-cost fuel than any other country in the world. I think we have the largest and most reliable electric grid in the world, and we have those things have led us to have the lowest cost of electricity of any developed country in the world. And I really think the Quadrennial report is a great opportunity to make sure that we keep that advantage for years and years to come. And I think we have the new technologies available now. The grid is, much of the equipment in the grid was built in the 60s and 70s. So the opportunity is now to, a lot of refurbishment of the grid would have had to happen anyway. And the opportunity now is to infuse that refurbishment with the new technology that's going to enable the grid to meet all the new challenges that Mr. Blue mentioned in not only in cybersecurity, but in integrating renewables and all the other things that we think the grid will have to do in the next 50 years.
Marty, I agree with you. It's not a supply problem. It's an infrastructure issue. We need more pipeline infrastructure. More broadly, I'd just like to say thanks to the White House, DOE, and the task force for undertaking this process. I think it's incredibly important. It's the right time to do it. And my one specific final thought would be, remember the value of public-private partnerships. I think a lot gets done very effectively in this area that way, and I would encourage policymakers to continue with that approach.
Join me in thanking this panel. We're now going to, as our panel departs, set up for the open mic session, and we'll hold up signs giving you directions. And we ask that you comply with the 3-minute rule, or I will interrupt you and ask you and thank you for your comments. Remember, this is your opportunity not only to comment orally, but the department really wants everyone in this room to file comments. As you heard all morning, this process is going to be successful if the department and the White House hear from as many different divergent views as possible. So I'm going to give you that address again. It's QERcomments@hq.doe.gov. Please submit your comments in writing. They have equal weight to whether or not you were an invited speaker or a commenter here at what will be one of many public hearings. We want to hear from all of you. Are we good to go? Terrific. So again, it is my honor to introduce you to our esteemed Department of Energy colleagues who will be listening to your comments. There are many others who are watching the live streaming of this back at the Forrestal building. But I want to introduce Dr. Karen Wayland. She is the Deputy Director of the DOE Office of Energy Policy and Systems Analysis for state, local, and tribal cooperation. She is in charge of all these meetings and is the one person who is managing the outreach for this very extensive process. Next to her is John Richards, who is in that same office and serves Karen as senior advisor. And to his right is Matt McGovern, who is also a senior advisor in that office. So the process will be that you will come to one of the standing mics, introduce yourself by name, and if you have an organization that you're representing, we'd love to know that as well. And I will be calling off the names as you signed in. So if you were, we will do our best to make sure we're getting you based on the time you signed in. It may not be a perfect system. So with that, our first commenter is Barbara Tyron.
Thank you very much. I am Barbara Tyron, Director of Washington and State Relations at the Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI. EPRI recently completed a concept paper, The Integrated Grid, which examines the rapid rise of distributed energy resources and how these technologies could be integrated into the electric power system so customers could enjoy the benefit of both central power system and the distributed technologies in the most cost-effective manner. The integrated grid enables the optimal combination of local generation, energy storage, energy efficiency, and new uses of electricity integrated with central generation to provide reliable, affordable, and environmentally sustainable electricity. The approach allows resource deployment that will realize all potential benefits and requires a modern grid characterized by connectivity, enabling interconnection rules, and rate structures that enhance the value of the power system to all consumers. Although the journey towards a fully integrated grid will take decades, EPRI is pleased to submit the first of 3 phases of the integrated grid, the concept paper, and we would like to submit that into the permanent QER comments library as noted earlier today and are available to discuss it at any time. EPRI plans to finalize phase 2 in the summer of 2014. This next phase will establish a comprehensive framework to address research gaps in key areas and assess the technology needs by examining 1, a benefit cost framework, 2, interconnection technical guidelines, and 3, grid planning and operations. This scientifically rigorous assessment before system-wide deployment will support prudent investment for grid modernization. Phase 2 will also be submitted to the QER library upon completion. Phase 3 will involve demonstrations of the methodology for a particular power system to assess the feasibility of an integrated benefit cost methodology, as well as 1 or more technology demonstrations, and will continue over the next 2 years. EPRI looks forward to providing future updates and to continuing our collaboration with the Department of Energy and other stakeholders to shape the future of electricity together. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Becky Harrison.
Good afternoon. My name's Becky Harrison, and I'm the CEO of the GridWise Alliance, and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to address this body as the DOE examines this vital topic of our nation's electric delivery infrastructure. The GridWise Alliance has a unique cross-section of members, including electric utility, IT and communication equipment and service providers, national labs, academic institutes, ISO RTOs, and more. The GridWise Alliance issued a report last year entitled Improving Electric Grid Reliability and Resiliency, which highlighted many of the lessons learned from Superstorm Sandy and other very large-scale events such as floods, wildfires, and ice storms. In our report, we highlighted the increasing interdependency of our critical infrastructures, including our gas delivery infrastructure, our information and communications infrastructure, our fueling supply chain, and our electric infrastructure. As our digital economy becomes increasingly dependent on electricity, the impacts from power outages are increasing, and we must understand and manage these interdependencies proactively in order to ensure that we can recover from very large-scale events quickly and effectively. Grid-related technologies, including remote sensing and control capabilities, enable a utility to have greater situational awareness and are essential to preventing and responding to extreme weather events as well as cybersecurity and physical threats. But today, they are not widely deployed to maximize their capability. Multi-customer microgrids that consist of different entities or properties such as gas stations, ATMs, and grocery stores can improve resiliency during and following very large-scale events, but the rules regarding who will manage these and how they will interface with the larger grid must be defined before they can be widely deployed. We also believe it is important to ensure that consumers' engagement is incorporated into this process as our nation's electric delivery system undergoes a substantial transformation in the coming years. Our goals must be to maintain and even improve our current reliability levels that our nation has enjoyed while embracing innovation that will take us to the next level. Transitioning to a two-way interconnected electric system where customers are both consumers and producers of electricity is important. Currently, we lack the infrastructure and systems to truly manage a transactive energy world, enabling these new prosumers. The GridWise Alliance stands ready to assist in this critical QER effort, and I will be submitting our report and our remarks for the record.
Thank you. Next, we have Molly Simon.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to offer comment on the pending Quadrennial Energy Review. My name is Molly Simon, and I'm here on part of the National Wildlife Federation, one of the nation's oldest and largest conservation organizations dedicated to inspiring Americans to protect wildlife and our children's future. On behalf of our more than 4 million members and supporters nationwide, we applaud your efforts to craft a comprehensive federal roadmap to identify and implement consistent, clear energy goals and policies. I am here today to stress that these policies must enhance our ability to combat climate change. In fact, the National Wildlife Federation believes that this must be the single most important factor informing all of our major energy infrastructure and investment decisions. We were thrilled to hear President Obama's commitment last June to, quote, take bold action to reduce carbon pollution and, quote, lead the world in a coordinated assault on climate change. The National Wildlife Federation has been working hard to support the numerous efforts of the administration has already taken to reduce our economy-wide carbon pollution, and we look forward to continuing this collaboration. These policies have helped protect our most cherished lands and the wildlife that depends on them from the impacts of unabated climate change. However, we must reiterate that an all-the-above energy policy is simply incompatible with this administration's stated goals of cutting carbon pollution and will continue to undermine our ability to address climate change. An all-the-above energy policy that allows for the expansion of coal mining and coal leasing, oil development and export, and turns America's heartland into a thoroughway for Canadian tar sands export pipelines will directly undercut the laudable efforts of the administration to reduce our domestic carbon pollution, like the pending rule to limit greenhouse gas emissions from existing power plants. We must not undo the potential benefit of the substantial and historic effort by simply increasing emissions in other sectors. The latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released just a few weeks ago, was alarmingly clear. Climate change possesses a growing threat to our health, economic livelihood, and food and water sources for billions of people, including Americans. With the drought in California already in a state of emergency and the rest of the country bracing for a summer filled with increased wildfires, hurricanes, and extreme weather events, it is imperative that we do everything in our power to mitigate these impacts and protect communities and wildlife from further devastation. But this goal cannot be achieved at the level scientists warn are necessary if we continue an all-the-above energy strategy that deepens our reliance on polluting fossil fuels. In June of last year, President Obama declared that he would not find the Keystone XL tar sands pipeline in the nation's interest if it was found to be, quote, significantly exacerbating of climate change. We applaud this commitment and look forward to the rejection of the highly pollutant and dangerous project. We also hope that this same climate test will be applied to all major energy infrastructure decisions under the administration's authority. We are very pleased to see the draft QER include a long-term goal of advancing clean energy and recognize the threat of climate-driven severe weather events to our nation's—
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ron Edelstein.
Good afternoon. I'm Ron Edelstein from the Gas Technology Institute. I appreciate being able to address the panel and DOE on the QER. I will address the subject of R&D needs, and I'll focus on resiliency and vulnerability, particularly on the natural gas side. I'll start with the end-use activities, R&D on combined heat and power and distributed generation in all its senses, that is natural gas-driven engines, fuel cells, renewables-driven. CHP and DG can really help the resiliency of the nation's energy grid. If we go a little bit upstream now to the gas distribution system, which is aging, replacement of distribution systems, advanced technologies to enable risk-based assessments of risks and consequences, running gas to new neighborhoods and new areas, and enabling the DG and other systems to be put into place, very, very important. Moving further upstream to the pipelines, redundant pipeline systems, additional pipeline capacity of places, especially New England, is important. Making sure those systems are piggable, that the latest sensors are being worked on, latest technologies. We applaud in this sense the midstream R&D, the new line in the DOE fossil budget. But we think fossil natural gas R&D is woefully underfunded. Further upstream in the natural gas supply side, since the closing down of REPC, additional research to fund natural gas supply R&D, particularly with respect to green fracking, which is already in place in many places, and additional technologies to reduce methane emissions. We think this kind of R&D is very, very important to ensure resiliency and reduce vulnerability of our nation's energy system. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Christina Cody.
Good afternoon. I'm Christina Cody. I'm a Senior Program Officer with the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, representing the State Public Utility Commissioners. The QER's early focus on resilience is timely because of the multitude of vulnerabilities our utility infrastructure faces every day. These vulnerabilities can take the shape of sophisticated Metcalfe-style attacks or a massive storm like Hurricane Sandy. For well over 100 years, our lights, for the most part, have stayed on, despite the numerous challenges and vulnerabilities our utility systems face every day. Clearly, though, the times and threats we face are changing. The QER can address these challenges in several ways. The utilities own and operate the infrastructure themselves, and although we regulate them, they know their infrastructure better than anyone. Therefore, our regulated utilities are ultimately responsible for shoring up the safety and security of their systems. The QER can inform and support these utility efforts. But as their regulators and as the public officials entrusted with the responsibility of ensuring the safe, reliable, and affordable delivery of utility services, this is our problem too. This industry spends billions of ratepayer dollars per year to train, educate, and drill its employees and maintain physical infrastructure so that the lights stay on or come back on quickly after an incident. It is here that the role of the states is paramount. State regulators are responsible for setting the rates for and regulations that govern the nation's investor-owned distribution systems. We would all like to have the safest, most reliable system possible. That's everyone's goal. However, we must remember at the end of the day, it's the consumer who will be paying for every decision that is made. Regulators think about their mission in this context. At NARUC, our staff is working around the clock on resilience and security issues. We've written 2 primers on understanding, measuring, and paying for resilience. Through our Committee on Critical Infrastructure, we are doing a tremendous amount of outreach and education through workshops, seminars, trainings, and much more. On cybersecurity and resilience, NARUC has launched a multi-state tour running, training, and educational seminars at our member offices throughout the country. In fact, by this summer, NARUC will have initiated cybersecurity technical assistance with 35 of our members. The only limitation to our ability to continue this training is resources, and we are grateful for the support of the U.S. Department of Energy to allow us to come as far as we have. We are ready and look forward to continuing this important work. We are getting up to speed on all these developments and quickly because utilities are coming to us with requests to harden their system. Whether these investments address physical or cybersecurity, they must also use risk-based approaches to prudently meet the prevailing expectations of reliability and affordability of the ratepayer. All of this depends on partnership, dialogue, and discussion. As we've seen across the country, states are pursuing innovative approaches to ensuring grid resilience. While NARUC does not endorse any one particular approach, the QER can learn a great deal from the states who are pushing ahead with new and innovative policies. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Barry Lawson. Okay. Elizabeth Knoll. Jim Hecker. And the last one, it's not particularly clear whether or not he would like to speak. He put the check mark in the wrong column. Justin Ackley. All right. We thank you very much. This has been a very informative session. It is only the first of many. Again, I want to encourage all of you to submit comments at qercomments@hq.doe.gov. Let me turn the floor over now to Dr. Wayland, who will close our session this morning.
Thank you, and I appreciate all the time that people have spent providing us with their views. There will, as the Secretary and Dr. Holdren mentioned, there will be many more opportunities, both online and in these public listening sessions. There will be likely be about 14 more of these sessions around the country. The next one will be on April 21st, looking at infrastructure constraints on a regional basis in New England. That it'll start at 9 o'clock on the 21st and be held at the Rhode Island Convention Center in Providence. It'll be followed by another session at 1 o'clock in the Phoenix Building in Hartford, Connecticut. Again, there will be a whole series of 4 to 5 panels looking at infrastructure constraints in New England. Those will be followed by 4 other meetings that we've already publicly noticed. One in New Orleans on petroleum storage, transmission, and distribution. One in North Dakota looking at infrastructure constraints in the Bakken. One in Chicago looking at issues around rail, barge, truck, and other modes of transport for electricity or energy supplies. And then the final one that we've announced so far is looking at electricity issues with a Western focus in Portland, Oregon. The transcript for today, we've had a court reporter here. The transcript will be up on our website, which is energy.gov/QER within the next couple days. We'll also have a summary notes of the meeting within 2 weeks also posted on the web. For those of you who have submitted comments, those comments will not be, if you submit them to the QER comments at hq.doe.gov, those will not be publicly available right away, but by the end of the process of writing the QER, they will become part of the public record and will be public. The panelists' statements today will be up on the web within the next 24 hours or 48 hours at this point. I want to thank Energetics and Peggy Welsh, who has done so much more than help to facilitate this meeting. Her staff really helped our staff put this together, and I'd like to quickly mention my staff: Matt McGovern, John Richards, Shani Vines, Larry Mansuetti, Levi Tillerman Dick, Rima Weed, and Colin Bishop, and of course Michael Gu also helped out, and you'll be seeing them around the country if you join us, so thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.